When the job market hit a crisis point, finding work turned into an exhausting race where every application demanded more effort than the last. As if finding a job wasn't hard enough already, companies themselves handled recruitment with shocking carelessness. A young woman sat behind one of the booths, but instead of working, she was scrolling through her phone as if the chaos around her had nothing to do with her. The company's name stood out with bold arrogance, promising something beyond ordinary, as though the sign itself carried an idea that left no room for weakness. Yet the booth remained disturbingly empty, and that alone sparked an uneasy feeling, like people were avoiding it for a reason. Glancing around, the applicant noticed long lines at the other booths, dense, intense crowds where everyone clung desperately to even the smallest chance. The noise kept rising, voices grew sharper, promises sounded increasingly desperate, and the job fair quickly dissolved into a suffocating wave of chaos. Realizing there was no point in waiting any longer, the young man let out a sharp breath and walked toward the empty booth, as though making a choice he couldn't take back. The woman behind the table didn't even look up, her eyes still fixed on her screen, and that indifference felt strangely like a silent challenge. With every step, the atmosphere around him shifted, and he clearly felt the moment he crossed some invisible boundary. When the company representative finally looked at him, satisfaction flickered in her eyes as if he had done exactly what she wanted. A faint glow flashed along the boundary, cutting away the noise in the crowd, turning that corner into its own isolated world. After sizing him up in seconds, the blue-haired woman asked him to introduce himself, her voice carrying an interest that felt both sharp and unsettling. Trying to hide the tremor in his voice, the young man began speaking, forcing himself to sound confident, even as tension slowly built inside him. She listened with a faint frown, as though she wasn't searching for his strengths, but for the weakness she could latch on to. Without wasting time, the woman asked him about loyalty and hard work, saying those words as though they alone determined a person's fate. Taking it as doubt in his abilities, the applicant felt anxiety rising in his chest, his thoughts immediately jumping to the possibility that he had already shown himself weaker than everyone else. And honestly, he had every reason to fear that, because all around him people were fighting brutally for a chance, trying to prove their worth at any cost. Nearly giving up, he lowered his head, feeling disappointment slowly close around him, while the thought that he should have left earlier became harder and harder to ignore. In the silence, the company representative flipped through his documents, her eyes gliding over each line as though searching for something hidden between the dry facts. Then suddenly her voice cut through the silence as she calmly informed him that he was hired. And the words sounded far too simple to believe at first. Shock mixed with unease because he had never expected success. And the news felt almost unreal, like some kind of mistake. Rising from her chair, the woman leaned against the desk and confidently stated that his talent was exactly what they were looking for, as though the outcome had been obvious from the beginning. The shock still wouldn't fade. As a final-year student, he knew perfectly well that almost nobody with a resume like his ever made it through, and the entire situation felt strangely wrong. As if sensing his thoughts, she smiled softly and once again emphasized how valuable he was, staring directly into his eyes with such certainty that doubting her already felt pointless. Then came the conditions, generous to the point of absurdity: a high salary, paid vacation, insurance. Everything sounded so appealing that instead of excitement, it only made him more wary. The salary especially caught his attention. For a graduate, numbers like that felt completely unreachable, and the offer looked less like an opportunity and more like some kind of error. Noticing his hesitation, the woman paused for a moment, almost as if considering whether she should raise the offer even higher to finally tip the scales. Leaning slightly closer, she watched him carefully, waiting for his reaction as though terms like these were supposed to crush any remaining doubt. But inside the applicant's mind, suspicion only kept growing. The offer seemed too perfect, as though something was hidden beneath it, something they deliberately weren't mentioning. He twitched as if about to stand up, but his fingers unconsciously tightened around the edge of the chair, betraying the tension he could no longer hide. The representative of the almost unbelievably perfect company frowned in visible displeasure. His interest had already been sparked, and his attempt to leave threatened to ruin the path she had carefully laid out. A flash of determination appeared in the young man's eyes. He had almost convinced himself that this wasn't his path, no matter how tempting it seemed. Trying to smooth things over, he gave an awkward smile and muttered something about urgent business, hoping to leave without causing trouble. But irritation flared in her eyes. Far too much effort had gone into this to let the target slip away at the last second. Then came a sharp command telling him to come back, and the young man froze, unable to understand how ordinary words could carry such overwhelming authority. Her voice seemed to lock his body in place, stripping away his freedom, leaving him sitting there confused and unable to move or even look away. When he tried to stand, he failed. His legs refused to respond, as though they no longer belonged to him, and the realization sent his heartbeat racing. Ignoring his panic completely, the composed woman calmly tilted her head and softly asked him to give her a minute, as though nothing unusual was happening at all. Still speaking in a quiet, confident tone, she promised to provide proof, opening the company's records and credentials to make her words feel more convincing and impossible to dismiss. With a casual motion, she spread the documents across the desk and sat on its edge, confidently insisting that everything was completely legal and fully backed from above. A faint smile lingered on her face as she showed him the papers, inviting him to read every line as though their perfection alone should erase any doubts. Gradually getting drawn in, the applicant focused on the text, though one question kept circling in his mind: why had they chosen him? Sensing the shift in his attention, she began explaining the job in greater detail, as if reinforcing her hold over his focus and leaving no room for hesitation. As it turned out, all he had to do was oversee a newly acquired property, and the task sounded far too simple for the reward being offered. Without giving the inexperienced student time to think clearly, she continued talking about the salary, and the confidence in her voice slowly started wearing down his caution. To seal the deal, the woman casually mentioned the 3 8s in his assigned number, giving it an almost mystical significance and strange importance. Unexpectedly, that detail struck a chord with him. He believed in signs himself, and the idea that this was fate slowly began to feel believable. Sunlight poured across the glass skyscrapers outside, reflecting in every direction, and the entire scene felt far too bright for what was happening inside. Meanwhile, the woman was already filling out the paperwork quickly and confidently, brushing aside his attempts to slow things down, as though the decision had already been made for him long ago. Once everything was complete, she calmly congratulated him on being accepted and extended her hand, and somehow that simple gesture made the entire situation suddenly feel real. The new employee could only smile awkwardly and quietly promise that he would live up to their expectations, taking on responsibilities that had seemed completely out of reach only hours earlier. With a soft smile, she asked him not to leave his workplace without a reason, and beneath that gentle tone lingered a trace of strictness that instantly put him on edge. Without giving him time to process anything, his newly appointed boss immediately started talking about preparations, casually informing him that his ticket had already been booked and someone would meet him at the station, as though every detail had been settled in advance. His excitement wavered. He had never given them his information, and the thought of a ticket already being purchased felt disturbingly wrong. Calmly explaining herself, she referred to the contract and added that all the details had already been sent to his phone, speaking as though this were completely normal. Everything was moving far too fast, leaving no space for doubt or reflection, and the young man merely asked quietly if he was allowed to leave now, doing his best to remain calm on the surface. His boss let him go easily, watching him with a look that carried unmistakable satisfaction, as though this agreement meant far more than an ordinary contract. Clutching the paperwork in his hands, the young man noticed the 2-year employment term, and suddenly the number felt much heavier than it had before. Left alone, the supervisor watched him all the way to the door, and behind the lenses of her glasses, a faint red spark flashed for just a moment. And at that exact instant, the lines within the contract silently changed, erasing the original conditions and turning the agreement into an endless obligation. Eastern City Station welcomed its passengers with spotless order and restrained bustle, where hurried footsteps blended into a precise, almost mechanical rhythm. His bag swayed lightly at his side as the young man walked through the station while talking to his parents, carefully sharing his good fortune, but hiding the strange details he still couldn't bring himself to mention. Warm voices answered him from the other end of the call, filled with hope and quiet pride, and their support gave him strength, as though their faith alone could steady him through this unfamiliar turn in his life. Lifting his gaze, he scanned the departure board, searching through dozens of routes until he finally found his own, marked by a strangely exact and almost cold coincidence. It turned out the company even had its own private station, and the platform number matched the departure time perfectly, as though everything had been arranged specifically for him from the very beginning. The white train looked impossibly flawless, and the 8-hour journey promised silence and enough time to finally process everything that had happened and the decisions he had made. Once seated, the passenger allowed himself to relax. He pulled down his mask slightly and let his thoughts drift freely toward a future that still felt uncertain and unreal. The train picked up speed and vanished into the night, where the lights of distant houses drowned in darkness, and the motion itself began to feel strangely detached from reality. A sharp announcement voice declared the arrival station, tearing him out of a sleep that felt far too short, as though time inside the carriage had flowed differently. The young man stretched, trying to shake the heaviness from his body and clear his head, but the remnants of sleep clung stubbornly to his mind. Outside the window, the city unfolded beneath a pink-tinted glow, and the sight felt oddly distorted, as though reality itself had shifted slightly out of place. Stepping onto the platform, he glanced around, taking in the wealth and movement surrounding him. Yet with every passing second, his anxiety about what came next only continued to grow. The people around him looked far too elegant and refined, creating the strange feeling that he had wandered into someone else's carefully written story where everyone already knew their role. He studied the passing faces, trying to spot the person who was supposed to meet him, but with every second, the waiting grew heavier and more noticeable. Meanwhile, somewhere within the crowd, a woman examined his photograph closely, comparing it against the faces around her, while patiently searching for a match. Her eyes landed on him almost immediately. Amid all the polished appearances surrounding him, he looked far too ordinary, and that alone gave him away. Without wasting a second, she headed toward him quickly and confidently, her muted footsteps carrying a strange sense of purpose behind them. Hearing the sound, the newcomer turned around and instantly realized she was coming straight toward him, the surprise appearing in his eyes before thoughts could even form. Before he had any chance to react, the girl greeting him suddenly wrapped him in a tight embrace, as though they had been separated for years, and there was something in that gesture that went far beyond simple happiness. Embarrassment stiffened the young man's movements, and he didn't pull away immediately, trying to convince himself that her behavior was just enthusiasm, even as a vague tension began building inside him. Despite the closeness, he never returned the hug, remaining awkward and tense, as though even the slightest movement might shatter the fragile balance of the moment. All he could do was quietly note how overly affectionate she was, and the detail felt strange somehow, as if something more was hidden behind such a simple gesture. To deal with the awkwardness, he began running formulas and random facts through his head, clinging to logic like an anchor that could steady the growing confusion inside him. The girl with the adorable little ears instantly picked up on his state, casually noticing the change in his breathing, as though she hadn't read it from his body language at all, but directly from him. Scratching the back of his head in embarrassment, he introduced himself as Yang Wenhan and asked for her name, his eyes unconsciously lingering on the strange ears hidden among her hair. Introducing herself as Yu Xing, the girl casually added that he could call her Little Fish, saying it in a way that made the nickname feel strangely meaningful. With a smile, she explained that cats love fish, and the simple sentence somehow sounded like an obvious truth understood only by her. Trying to stay serious, Yang extended his hand and expressed his hope that they would work well together, attempting to steer the conversation back towards something normal and professional. She wrapped both of her hands around his, and while the gesture felt sincere, there was also something in it that seemed far too confident. Casually calling him Big Brother, the girl explained that she had been instructed to escort him to the company, and there was a quiet importance in her voice that made the situation feel oddly significant. The newcomer couldn't shake the growing sense that none of this was real. Everything around him felt like scenes pulled straight out of an anime, from the strange way people spoke to the perfectly polished appearances. Trying to ground himself, he decided that maybe this kind of behavior was simply normal here, and that people followed customs that still felt foreign to him. Once outside, they approached the road where a bike with golden accents stood waiting, instantly drawing attention like something out of place in the ordinary world. But his gaze kept drifting back to her ears, and Young found himself trying to understand what they really were, because they looked far too natural to be fake accessories. Pulling out a remote, Yu Xing quickly activated the vehicle, and only then did his attention finally shift toward the bike itself and its intricate details. Examining it more closely, he noticed the flawless craftsmanship and precision in the design, suspecting the gold looked real not by accident, but because of extraordinary attention to detail. Looking slightly embarrassed, the girl admitted that she didn't know how to drive a car, explaining that everyone else had been too busy, so she suggested using the scooter instead. He immediately reassured her that he didn't mind at all, and was actually glad for the chance to see more of the city, trying to ease the awkwardness between them. Privately, he noted how genuine she seemed, and started thinking that maybe the atmosphere at the company was just as warm, and strangely enough, the thought gave him confidence. Trying to regain his attention, the girl called out to him again using the phrase "Big Brother," her voice sounding soft yet oddly insistent. Quickly climbing onto the bike, She settled into place with complete confidence, as though she had done it countless times before, then invited him to sit behind her. The moment he settled in behind her, the vehicle suddenly lurched forward before he even had time to figure out what to hold on to. As the speed increased, he felt a wave of embarrassment over the entire situation, since this kind of experience was completely new to him. Trying not to cross any boundaries, the young man hesitated over where to place his hands. Holding on to the girl felt awkward, and the uncertainty only made him more tense. Pulling him out of his thoughts, Yuxing glanced back slightly without taking her attention off the road and asked why he wasn't holding on to anything. There was genuine confusion in her voice, as though his behavior seemed strange to her. Almost immediately, she added that without support, he could fall once they reached the mountains, because there would be a takeoff ahead. And as if to confirm her words, a steep incline began appearing on the horizon. Trying to sound confident, Yang simply smiled and claimed he had excellent balance, reassuring himself more than her, as though that answer could somehow save him from reacting differently. Only a moment later did the meaning of her words truly sink in, and he found himself wondering what exactly she meant by takeoff, desperately trying to find a logical explanation. His thoughts were cut short instantly. In the very next second, the scooter shot upward, surrounded by blazing yellow flames, as though they had broken free from normal reality itself. The sudden acceleration forced him to grab onto the girl's shoulders, and a terrified scream escaped him before he could stop it, filled with fear and complete disbelief. Watching the city shrink rapidly beneath them, the young man tried desperately to understand what was happening, unable to comprehend how they had ended up flying through the air or where they were even headed. Then he remembered Yuxing mentioning the mountains, and with that memory came a flood of disturbing possibilities that sent a chill racing down his spine. Completely ignoring his panicked shouting, Yuxing simply enjoyed the flight, as though the speed and height brought her genuine joy and freedom. When his fear finally reached its limit, a desperate thought flashed through the young man's mind. The only way out was to jump immediately. Fully aware of the risk, he decided to count to 3, forcing himself to gather courage while the scooter continued climbing higher and higher into the sky. The moment he finished counting, he pushed himself away from the scooter, his body giving in to the fall that seemed like his only chance at survival. For one brief instant, he believed he had at least managed to escape, and that feeling of freedom overwhelmed his fear, filling him with hope that he might actually survive. But the expected sensation of falling never came, and the realization immediately forced him to focus on what was happening around him. Right in front of him was Yuxing, effortlessly holding him in place as though he weighed absolutely nothing, her smile remaining strangely calm the entire time. She winked and cheerfully remarked that she had been warned of a possible escape attempt and therefore advised not to let go of the prey. Stunned, Ian looked at her, trying to comprehend what had happened, because the escape plan had just collapsed, leaving nothing in its wake but confusion. Without changing her tone, the girl added that there was no communication, no people, no way back nearby, and her words sounded calm, but that only made them more alarmed. Choking with fear, the boy shouted that they probably wanted to deprive him of his organs, and this thought seemed to him the only explanation for what was happening. Already at the edge of the forest, among the tall trees, the girl continued to hold her new colleague while he continued to scream, unable to cope with the horror that had washed over him. At the same time, she looked genuinely puzzled, as if she did not understand what he was talking about, and the connection between his fears and reality remained a mystery to her. Breaking into tears, the young man said incoherently that he had not yet had time to have children, that he was obliged to help his parents, and begged them not to harm him, clinging to every word as if his life depended on it. Holding him in her arms, the young girl calmly looked down and said that there would be no harm. But since he had signed the contract, he now belonged entirely to the teacher, and she said it so easily as if there was nothing strange about it. Hastily promising that he would not try to escape again, Jan asked to be lowered to the ground, wanting to feel solid support under his feet again and at least come to his senses a little. Without thinking, the girl simply let go of her hands and he fell heavily down, clumsily landing on the ground like a shapeless sack, not even having time to group himself. With a genuinely kind expression, Yuxing leaned towards him and gently told him that it was better for him not to run away anymore. And there was no threat in her voice, only calm confidence. There was a double meaning hidden in John's behavior, because outwardly he looked submissive, but inside he was already calculating how easy it would be to deceive her again and try to escape. Assuming his most innocent appearance, the young man addressed her softly, calling her little fish, trying to sound friendly and harmless. Pointing to the sky, the young man confidently said that a pig was flying there, and the girl immediately looked up, seriously trying to discern something impossible, as if spirits could really learn to do such a thing. While she was gazing at the empty sky, Ian was already rushing away, without looking back and pushing himself to the limit, just to increase the distance between them. The thought that money could be earned later, but health could not be restored, gave him strength, and fear drove him on, forcing him to run faster. Turning around, the girl said in confusion that she didn't see any pigs, and there was genuine bewilderment in her voice. Instead of seeing him nearby, she noticed only a quickly receding silhouette, and this discovery came belatedly. Upset, Yu Xing took a deep breath and shouted after him that he had deceived her and had done wrong, and there was a childish resentment in this reproach. Without stopping, the fugitive threw over his shoulder that she should run and save herself, because she had gotten involved in a scam, although she remained too trusting. The knowledge that she had a flying scooter fueled his fear and kept him from slowing down, forcing him to move faster. Realizing that there was no other way to hide, the guy turned sharply and jumped into the field, hoping to get lost among the grass and buy himself some time. But his calculations were not justified, because a heavy boot was already rapidly catching up with him from behind, leaving no chance to dodge. A strong blow landed on his back, and Ian cried out in pain, losing his balance and falling forward. The pain from the blow was particularly acute, and the girl shouted that she would punish him, not hiding her irritation. At that very moment, 2 notifications appeared in front of him, as if out of thin air, recording the impact received. Having never seen anything like it, Ian froze, staring at the pop-up windows, trying to figure out what it was. The system then produced a detailed dossier on the girl, which indicated her strength, character, and affiliation with the Cat Spirit clan. He quickly read the lines, trying to remember as much as possible about his 16-year-old colleague, noting her speed and recklessness. Seeing the young man lying motionless, Yu Xing uncomfortably thought that perhaps she had hit him too hard and should have been more careful. Since the boy showed no signs of life, she decided to take him to the teacher's house, and the white building with its delicate terraces immediately stood out from the surrounding landscape. On a sunlit wooden table stood several neatly corked bottles with minimalist labels, and by the look of it, it was wine. The same blue-haired girl sat next to the bed, leisurely puffing on her pipe and watching the sleeping young man with lazy interest. Coming to his senses, the young man lazily opened his eye, feeling the consequences of his failed escape and the heaviness throughout his body. He struggled to rise and grabbed his head, feeling a buzzing and residual pain that spread throughout his body. He was brought out of his stupor by a familiar female voice, calmly asking if he was awake, and it sounded unexpectedly close. Leaning back, the girl who had recently hired him looked at him carefully, as if she were studying a new toy or a strange but harmless animal. Despite the fog in his head, the guy immediately recognized her, but her appearance surprised him, because the boss looked completely different. Almost immediately, a notification appeared before his eyes, informing him that in front of him was a heartless demoness, capable of much more than just paying his wages on time. Of all the details, it was the mention of possible delays that frightened him the most, even more than her very nature and position. As he watched the lady lazily blow out smoke, he mentally panicked, realizing that he had found himself in another world where his position was dependent. Breaking the pause, she asked whether his obligations were spelled out in the contract, immediately justifying his behavior by saying that he could have simply not read the terms carefully. In complete bewilderment, the guy just opened his mouth, unable to find words, trying to comprehend what was happening. Without wasting any time, the boss explained that he had entered the world of cultivators who were monitored by the association, while in the human world, everything was explained scientifically through a special department. His face remained motionless, betraying no emotion, as if his mind had not yet had time to accept the new reality. Continuing confidently, the boss added that his health and property were completely safe and the company was operating legally. To be convincing, she noted that all previously announced conditions remain in force and are not a deception. To finally calm him down, the teacher advised him to check publicly available information that could confirm her words. In conclusion, she announced that he would be working as an older brother, explaining that this was a role similar to that of an executive director. Calmly continuing her explanation, the girl added that he had not ended up here by chance, since he himself had latent abilities hidden within him, and therefore his appearance was predetermined. Blowing another cloud of smoke in his direction, she lazily asked if he had any questions, as if everything she had said didn't require any further thought. The young man began to speak haltingly and hastily, admitting that everything had fallen upon him too suddenly, and although he already admitted the existence of cultivators and felt something inside, he could not fully accept it. With a touch of condescension, she noted that the young man remained calm in difficult situations, and his courage made him a suitable candidate, and it was these qualities that led to her choice. He awkwardly cleared his throat and looked away, feeling embarrassed by the frequent praise. which sounded unusual and caused internal discomfort. The boy looked up and made such a sweet expression in his eyes, in which one could almost guess a cat-like softness, and it was unexpectedly disconcerting. Clearing his throat again, he decided to ask the long-overdue question, which he had prepared for too carefully, knowing exactly to whom he was going to address it. Gathering his courage, the young man shouted out loudly whether she was going to delay his salary, and the question sounded sharp and unexpected. The voice echoed through the house so loudly that it could be heard even from outside, despite the thick walls and enclosed space. Holding back her irritation, the lady coldly explained that a legitimate company would not allow such a thing, and that the question itself seemed inappropriate and even rude to her. Watching her closely, Ian tried to figure out if she was telling the truth, while remembering the strange notifications and wondering if they were a manifestation of his abilities. Looking into his boss's face, the guy seemed to be trying to examine every detail, assessing how dangerous she could be and whether he should trust her. Tired of being stared at, she calmly told him to come early tomorrow, mentioning that she would arrange a small meeting before starting work. Hearing this, Yang was genuinely happy to have the opportunity to meet the other students, and a soft smile of agreement appeared on his face. However, the boss's tone quickly changed, and she added that he should lead by example, towering over him and emphasizing his superiority with a stern look. Continuing, the headmistress informed him that clothes had already been prepared for him in the dormitory and that she herself was going to rest. And this concern unexpectedly seemed encouraging to him. The hostel turned out to be a simple two-story building with modern architecture, comfortable and neat, without unnecessary details, but quite cozy. Settling down on the floor in his new uniform, he felt a strange satisfaction, because for the first time he had received an official job, and this brought him a quiet joy. The excitement grew, and in his mind the newly minted older brother already imagined how he would work hard, striving to surpass others and prove his worth. However, he was suddenly overcome by doubt, because such a high position seemed too significant to begin with, and he did not fully understand its meaning. Trying to find an explanation, Ian decided that perhaps it was just a matter of age, and this helped to calm the internal contradictions a little. Wanting to understand things better, he decided to use the system to learn more about his colleagues and remember their names, believing this was important for first impressions. Almost immediately, files of files appeared around the young man, including those of Yu Xing and his boss, Yu Wanning, each containing detailed information. The realization that there was a system filled him with excitement, and for a moment he imagined himself as a hero who could do something greater. The boy's thoughts carried him further, and he imagined how he would educate students, turning them into strong fighters and performing great deeds. However, his fantasies were not limited to the sublime, because he also dreamed of wealth and attention while remaining an ordinary person with his own desires. Immersed in these images, Jan stopped noticing his surroundings, completely carried away by his own thoughts and imagination. A sharp voice brought him back to reality, and looking up, he saw his boss, who was already standing in front of him and asking about the reason for his strange smile. Having settled down on the ottoman, the girl lazily ordered that a bottle and a lighter be brought to her from the cupboard, not wanting to waste energy on such trifles. Confused by her sudden appearance, Ian hastened to fulfill the request, still amazed at how she had entered unnoticed. As he sorted through the bottles in the fridge, he tried to figure out what to choose, while simultaneously thinking about her behavior and strange ease. Taking a bottle out of the refrigerator, the guy carefully handed it to his boss, watching her indifferent expression, as if what was happening around her did not arouse the slightest interest in her. Without bothering with words of gratitude, the boss abruptly hit the neck of the pipe, doing it confidently and habitually, as if this was an everyday action for her. Yielding to the blow, the lid flew up quickly, and a look of quiet satisfaction flashed across the girl's face, as if she had once again become convinced of her own skill. Without thinking, she immediately took a swig from the bottle, ignoring Ian's worried look, which clearly showed concern for her condition. The boss, running her hand over her lips, briefly asked for a light for her pipe, and her face betrayed a mixture of fatigue and lazy calm. Puzzled by the request, he looked at her in silence for a few seconds, since he had never encountered anything like this before and did not know what to do. Having gathered himself, the young man carefully brought the fire to the fire, watching the process with concentration, and carefully checked whether he was doing it correctly, trying not to make a mistake. Ignoring his efforts, the lady suddenly turned her head, as if she sensed someone approaching even before it became obvious. Almost immediately, large purple snakes with bright eyes began to crawl into the room, and their appearance looked ominous and did not bode well. Unaccustomed to such a sight, Jan retreated abruptly, not knowing where to hide and feeling his fear rapidly growing. Soon their mistress appeared, and her appearance, from her clothes to her gaze, radiated coldness and detachment, as if emotions were alien to her. Although the presence of the owner might have inspired calm, the boy did not feel any relief, because the atmosphere itself remained tense and alien. Sitting down gently next to her, she addressed Yu Wanning as a teacher, her voice calm but with a hint of respect. Still not accepting what was happening, the young man mentally compared her to a participant in a costume event, trying to find a familiar explanation for what he saw. The calm did not return, for another figure appeared in the doorway, and its presence immediately changed the situation. The new arrival's massive belt seemed too heavy, as if it was intended not for decoration, but for something much more serious. The dark dress hugged her figure tightly, and her long blue hair fell to her hips, creating an image that was both restrained and expressive. The overall appearance was completed by a cold expression on his face, and there was a hidden threat in it, as if there was strength hidden behind the calmness. The lady looked at Ian with slight displeasure, not hiding her disdain, as if his presence seemed unnecessary to her. Without saying a word, she sat down next to him, keeping her distance and continuing to observe what was happening. At this moment, the system displayed information about Anjuanji, stating that she was an ancient goose spirit associated with poison and seeking to restore her family. A dossier on Yan Yu then emerged, revealing her as a demon empress who held a grudge against her past death. The sight of these girls struck him to the depths of his soul, and Ian involuntarily froze with his mouth slightly open, feeling a mixture of admiration and fear, because being near creatures of such power seemed both honorable and dangerous. Noticing his condition, Yu Wanning calmly asked him not to worry, explaining that both were cold-tempered and quick-tempered, but that there were plenty of friendly inhabitants in the valley. As if confirming her words, a male voice was heard greeting the teacher, and its owner was already entering the room, attracting the attention of everyone present. With a wide smile, the guy seemed to illuminate the space, and his soft black hair swayed slightly as he moved, and his greeting gesture looked sincere and open. Almost immediately, the system gave out information describing him as an incomparable sword emperor, a bearer of the distinct essence of a hero, and these words sounded impressive. Watching him, Ian couldn't help but notice how much he fit the image of an ideal hero, who combines confidence, goodwill, and natural charisma. Without wasting any time, he walked over and shook their hands firmly, expressing his joy at meeting them and talking about the bright future that awaited them. With a wide smile, the unknown young man continued to assure that he was always ready to help, no matter the circumstances, and his words sounded sincere. Surrounded by such attention, Ian felt awkward, not knowing how to react to such a warm attitude, and only mentally noted what a good person he seemed to be. At that moment, the red-haired girl brought in a tray with cups of tea, offering the teacher a little rest, and her movements were quick and confident. Watching her, the young man noted with surprise that yesterday she had seemed too fabulous to him, but now she looked quite natural and even familiar. Interrupting the conversation, the boss sternly ordered everyone to introduce themselves, adding that unnecessary noise was unacceptable, and her tone immediately restored order. One by one, those present announced their titles, including ancient spirits and great warriors, and each performance seemed majestic. Listening to them, John felt awkward, because his own position seemed too modest against the backdrop of such high-profile titles. Realizing that it was his turn, he cleared his throat, trying to cope with his nerves and get his thoughts in order. Plucking up his courage, the guy briefly gave his name, adding that he was an ordinary person without any special background. When the introductions were over, Yuxing was already hurriedly leading him down the long corridors, explaining that his room hadn't been ready yesterday, so he'd spent the night in the guest room. With noticeable joy, the little girl added that now everything was prepared, and she would be happy to show him his new home. As he followed, Ian couldn't help but think about how pleasant she was to talk to, and this gave him a warm feeling of trust. Opening one of the doors, she gestured for him to come inside, and before him appeared a bright, spacious room that felt cozy. Upon entering, Yan involuntarily slowed his pace, as the space greeted him with thoughtful cleanliness, soft light, and harmony, where the bedroom, living room, and bathroom seemed to flow into each other, creating a feeling of complete comfort. As he looked around more closely, the young man felt a strange calm growing stronger, as every detail here seemed to emphasize the care for the tenant, and the personal space, allocated wisely, gave rise to the thought of a comfort rare for him. Yuheng looked at him with genuine warmth in her eyes, and her smile was not formal, but lively and joyful, because she directly said that she was happy that they would now live next to each other. Without holding back their emotions, they intertwined their fingers, and there was a lightness in this simple gesture. And Yan, slightly embarrassed, nevertheless called her his little sister, adding that he was counting on her support. Scratching the back of his head, he leaned forward a little awkwardly, trying to find the words, and then asked if she knew what exactly he would be doing in this place. It wasn't just idle curiosity, but a growing tension inside him, because despite his acquaintance with Yu Wanning's disciples, not a word had been said about his duties. Without making a secret of it, the girl calmly took out her phone, explaining that all the details would soon become known, but for now she would simply add him to the general chat. Bringing the devices closer together, they brought the screens almost in sync to establish a connection, and there was a sense of everyday simplicity in this action that contrasted sharply with the surrounding unusualness. The next moment, Jan's gaze changed dramatically as his eyes widened in surprise, and a wave of surprise washed over him again, as if this day had decided not to give him a break. The reason wasn't the interface at all, but the name of the chat, which talked about 4 beauties and another day without a massacre. And the guy couldn't figure out whether it was a joke or a reflection of reality. Not noticing his confusion, Yuxing easily explained that it was a group of teachers and students where they discussed announcements and everyday things, and at the same time strengthened their bonds. Gradually, the valley was enveloped in night, and thick clouds hid the heavenly bodies, leaving only the soft glow of the windows, behind which the lives of those who were in no hurry to fall asleep continued. Sitting on the wide bed, Ian lazily scrolled through the system, returning to information about the people he had met during his busy day. Once again, noticing the high status of those around him, he couldn't help but feel like he was surrounded by the reincarnations of emperors and demons, and this made him feel like an outsider. Trying to figure it out, the guy mentally went through the system's functions, but he still couldn't find any obvious benefit in it, which is why his irritation gradually increased. Clenching his fists, he acknowledged the unpleasant truth, because against the backdrop of these reborn entities, he looked like a secondary character, playing no significant role. To calm himself, the young man imagined how, in the ordinary world, such a system could make him an ideal employee, freeing people from lies and pretense. Suddenly, the interface changed, and new notifications lit up differently than before, causing Ian to freeze, feeling a growing sense of anticipation. It turns out that after meeting 5 people, he can earn points, and upon reaching a certain level, he will unlock a favor system that gives access to the abilities of others. The guy sat up abruptly on the bed, concentrated, pondering what he had heard, and came to the conclusion that with maximum pumping, he could become truly invincible. Realizing the hidden potential of what had recently been nothing but disappointment, he allowed himself a slight smile, which already conveyed confidence and new interest. Having barely tasted the future success, the young man almost immediately lost his previous confidence, because the cold detachment of the valley's inhabitants surfaced in his memory, and now Jan did not understand with whom he should even begin his journey. An unexpected thought flashed in his head like a spark, giving him courage, and his index finger rose up of its own accord, as if his body had already made a decision before his mind. Deciding to keep things simple, Ian opened the system and began choosing at random, muttering a nursery rhyme, letting chance determine who would begin his strange progress. Despite the chosen simplicity, the young man treated it with complete seriousness, carefully watching every movement, as if something truly important depended on a random choice. Finally, his finger stopped on the image of a girl with ears named Yuxing, the same one who had recently shown him his new place of residence. With a slight smile, he quietly said into the void that he was choosing Yuxing's younger sister, as if confirming his decision out loud. The guy frowned and decided that she seemed the most approachable to begin with, as her openness inspired hope for an easier rapprochement. Not wanting to waste a minute, he rose abruptly from the soft bed, as if he was afraid that delay would destroy the determination he had just found. Standing in front of the mirror, Ian tried to rehearse the conversation in advance, but every phrase sounded forced, causing only awkwardness. At some point, he began to treat what was happening as a game, feigning embarrassment and weakness, as if trying on different roles in front of the reflection. Carried away, the boy approached the mirror, simulating an imaginary approach, completely immersing himself in a strange acting improvisation. Coming to his senses abruptly, he admitted with annoyance that all his attempts looked unnatural, and none of his prepared lines inspired confidence. Dressing as he went, the young man decided to start simple, limiting himself to a simple greeting and perhaps an offer to look at the stars together. Outside, almost all the windows of the dormitory were softly lit, creating a feeling of warm life hidden behind the walls of the night valley. After wandering through the corridors, the young man finally stopped in front of the right door, where a neat sign indicated the name of the one he was looking for. Taking a few slow breaths, he gathered his courage and knocked softly, touching the door with the back of his finger. Trying to make his voice soft, the young man introduced himself and said that he would like to get to know her better, hoping that he would not be considered intrusive. The smile remained on his face as a deep silence followed, and no one rushed to open the door. Realizing after a few seconds that there would be no answer, Yang wondered where Yu Xing could have been at such a late hour. Having almost given up on this attempt and deciding to put it off until the morning, he suddenly noticed a familiar high tail to the side. Yanyo stood before him, her presence instantly filling the space with tension, despite her being shorter. Unable to bear it, the boy screamed, remembering the frightening information about her, because in front of him stood the reincarnation of the demonic empress. Unable to bear the noise, she immediately covered his mouth with her hand, sharply pressing him against the wall, depriving him of the opportunity to make even a sound. Maintaining silence, the girl showed her readiness to act only with her eyes, and cold determination could be read in her expression. Gasping for air, the boy tried to explain that they were already acquainted, but only a helpless moan escaped from under his palm. In response, the angry woman raised her hand to strike, and even her neat purple manicure did not soften the sense of threat emanating from this gesture. Overwhelmed with fear, John frantically thought about how he hadn't even had time to properly start a new life and could already lose it. Watching the hand rapidly approaching, he almost resigned himself to the chance of a future that never materialized. In a last flash of hope, the boy remembered how in stories, at such moments, heroes gain strength or memory, clinging to this image as salvation. Slowly and almost solemnly, Yan walked towards her abode, holding her recent victim in her palms, as if not paying attention to its weight, and in this lightness one could see a habit developed over long years of ruthless practice. Out of habit, my gaze slid around, carefully and tenaciously noting the slightest movements, as if the world around me were an arena where danger could arise suddenly, and I had to be prepared for it at all times. Under the cold water, the young lady carefully washed away traces of foreign flesh and blood, patiently running her fingers over her skin, getting used to the icy cleanliness that had long since become for her not just hygiene, but a part of her inner discipline. Maintaining focus and coldness, she constantly kept her goal in mind, because in this incarnation she was driven by one thought: to find the one who once took her life and not to let the past remain unanswered. Unexpectedly, the demon lord found Yan at the door of the fifth younger sister, where he was insistently calling her to come out. His voice sounded soft, but there was a hint of awkwardness in it, as if he himself did not fully understand his situation. From behind, his silhouette seemed alarmingly familiar. The outline of his shoulders and posture seemed to have been pulled from a memory where a threat had once lurked, leaving behind an unhealed mark. Noticing a possible danger in him, she was already mentally going over the details, trying to determine whether the person standing in front of her was the same, or whether it was just a shadow of the past playing with her attention again. The next moment, the girl took off, rapidly closing the distance, and without hesitation intercepted him, acting sharply and precisely, as if the decision had been made long before this meeting. The sudden request to stop interrupted the movement, and for a brief moment, time seemed to freeze, allowing the tension to hang between them, thick and almost palpable. Already hiding behind the door of her room, the fifth sister hastily asked to wait and not to take any sudden steps. Her voice sounded anxious, mixed with the hope of stopping the impending conflict. Guilt and worry were clearly visible on Yu Xing's face. She hastily explained that the victim was an older brother and tried to convey that this was not an enemy at all, but a person worthy of trust. From the outside, their scene looked strange and tense, but even in this whirlwind of emotions, the angry girl listened for a moment, loosening her grip and allowing the guy to breathe. Almost immediately, his hand twitched. Obeying instinct after a long period of immobility, his muscles responded with pain, and his body tried to regain control. Noticing the movement, she instantly saw it as a threat and pinned his hand back with her heel, holding it with cold precision, not giving him the slightest chance to escape. Looking closely at his face, filled with shame and suffering, Yan sternly demanded an explanation, asking why his back so resembled the one she was looking for. No longer holding back his tears, Yan tried to justify himself, stuttering that he did not understand the accusations and insisting that there was nothing unusual about him, only confusion and fear. Without releasing the pressure and holding him in place, the girl continued her interrogation, asking a new question, trying to find out if he was reincarnated, as if that could explain everything. The question itself sounded strange, since the young man had clearly said the opposite earlier, and now finding himself in the center of the scene, he only became more confused, not understanding the reasons for what was happening. Already raising her voice, the furious lady accused him of intending to harm the inhabitants of the valley, demanding to know why he was there at all, and every word was filled with disbelief. Nearby, a red-haired girl was noticeably nervous, worried about her new acquaintance, and tried to convince her sister that this was just a misunderstanding, devoid of any hidden meaning. Continuing to gently insist, Yuxing asked to let go of her older brother, because the boy's breathing was becoming intermittent and the situation was threatening to get out of control. Despite all the arguments, Yan Yu remained adamant because the memory of the past deception was still fresh, and it was this that forced her to keep the situation under strict control. Through tears, the boy explained plaintively that he had not wanted to come here at all, but was only looking for work and had found himself drawn in against his will, not understanding how to get out. The girl who met him on the platform confirmed what was said, adding that he tried to escape more than once while she stubbornly led him into the valley. Finally, Yan's hand loosened its grip, and she grabbed the victim by the shirt, sharply pulling him closer, as if wanting to once again confirm that she was right. Before letting him go, she coldly advised the boy not to act suspiciously, making it clear that she was always ready for a fight and would not allow herself to be caught off guard. The attacker was wearing high black heels, and this detail alone inspired involuntary respect, because only a truly strong and self-confident woman could enter into battle wearing such footwear. She turned sharply and walked away, leaving behind a confused Ian, who still could not fully comprehend what had happened and stood in complete bewilderment. Despite the fear he had experienced, a seemingly ingenious idea suddenly appeared in the boy's head, connected with the system's data, which he had not previously taken seriously. Having opened the notifications, the young man carefully studied the profile of the girl who had attacked him, and the line about daily searches for an enemy no longer seemed harmless, acquiring an alarming meaning. This explanation turned out to be appropriate because her behavior became clearer. The past did not let her go, and she again and again looked in the present for the one who once hurt her. Lost in thought about the traumas he had experienced and their traces in the present, he was suddenly pulled out by Yu Xing's voice, who asked with genuine concern if everything was okay with him. The question was not accidental, because there was a noticeable pain in the neck area, and the young man involuntarily reached out with his hand, trying to understand the source of this unpleasant feeling. Removing his hand, he involuntarily revealed a wide scratch on his neck, and the sight of it made Yu Xing cry out in surprise, not hiding her anxiety. Without hiding her excitement, the little girl approached, carefully examining the wound, and her proximity confused the young man, causing him to become confused and look away. After finishing her examination, the girl quickly added that he should come to her room later to get a healing potion, and she said this with confidence. The guy remained in place and froze, not having time to answer because her words sounded too unexpected, and she herself had already disappeared behind the door. Her request kept echoing in his thoughts, and Yan kept going over it again and again, unable to tear himself away from this simple, yet strangely meaningful phrase. Then the red-haired girl added that he should apply ointment to her injured leg, and this sounded even more unexpected, increasing his embarrassment. Trying to remain calm, the older brother acted confidently on the outside, although inside he felt joy and excitement from such trust. Thoughts swirled like a light wind because he himself wanted to get to know her better, and now circumstances were developing in the most unexpected way. The boy was suddenly pulled out of his spiraling thoughts by Yu Xing's voice, who asked with noticeable concern why he was still standing in the hallway and not coming in. Her attention was unexpectedly pleasant, and Yan's cheeks immediately flushed slightly, revealing his inner embarrassment and excitement. An image of a room filled with softness and neatness had already appeared in his imagination, and he imagined a space imbued with warmth and a gentle atmosphere. He had never been in such a place before, and he was at a loss as to how he should behave so as not to look awkward or out of place. Drawing on familiar images, the young man reasoned that the decor should reflect the character of the owner, which meant her room had to be cozy and pleasant. Meanwhile, Yu Xing looked closely at his detached expression, not understanding why he froze and did not take a single step forward. Having collected himself, the young man took a deep breath, as if trying to gain confidence and suppress the growing anxiety in the face of the unknown. Determination gradually took over, and he took a step forward, finally allowing himself to cross the line between expectations and reality. Entering carefully, Ian seemed to cross an invisible line beyond which the familiar feeling of calm was left behind. As soon as he reached the threshold, he froze, his eyes wide open, because what he saw was not at all what he had imagined. A disorderly pile of various weapons appeared before him, and this sight immediately destroyed all his previous expectations about the room. Looking at the objects piled on top of each other, the guest involuntarily wondered if something much more dangerous was hidden behind this cute appearance. The girl, sheepishly fingering one of the weapons, hastened to explain that she was only collecting them, believing that he might have misunderstood what he saw. Overwhelmed with anxiety, the young man grabbed his head, because in his mind such things could not be an ordinary hobby, especially in such disarray. Inwardly, he came to the gloomy conclusion that among all the inhabitants of this valley, there was hardly anyone who could be called ordinary. Despite its impressive size, she effortlessly placed the chest on the table while he tried to guess what might be hidden inside. Not wanting to prolong the wait, the girl opened it, and inside were neatly folded bladed weapons, the sight of which made her feel uneasy. Calmly saying that she dreamed of one day honoring her father's memory, she slowly twirled the scissors in her hands, and there was a cold determination in her voice. Thinking about the girl's words, John slowly went over what he had heard, trying to grasp the hidden meaning, and eventually decided that her father probably liked such things, since many men have a particular weakness for weapons. As soon as he mentioned his difficult relationship with his father, the system reacted instantly, notifying the young man of this and adding another point to his level of acquaintance with the girl, as if recording every detail of their communication. Looking at her face and movements, John noted to himself that behind her gentle manner and naive smile, there was something disturbing, as if deep within her character there were hidden traits that could suddenly emerge. Meanwhile, continuing to sort through the things in the chest, Yu Xing did not get distracted from her task, and in a calm voice asked the young man to sit down, promising to soon take care of his wound and prepare medicine. Carefully applying the cotton wool to the damaged skin, she spoke softly, trying to justify the fourth eldest sister who had caused the harm, convincing Ian that in reality she was not evil at all, but only appeared that way. Continuing to speak evenly and confidently, Yu Xing explained that Yan Yu had experienced difficult trials in her past life, and that was why her behavior now sometimes showed harshness and hidden aggression. Carefully dipping a cotton ball into the container of ointment, she continued to defend her attacker, claiming that the source of her anger lay not in herself, but in the man who had once betrayed her trust and feelings. Suddenly, a cold hardness appeared in her voice, and maintaining her previous calm posture, she said with obvious fury that if that traitor had also been reborn, then he must be found and destroyed. Hearing this abrupt change, John involuntarily tensed up, because the transition from softness to cold anger happened too suddenly, and such unpredictability made him feel a hidden danger nearby. Wanting to get to the bottom of things, he asked the question carefully, trying to confirm her guess that the man who had entered the valley by deception, mentioned earlier, was indeed her former lover. Nodding slightly, the red-haired girl confirmed his guess and told him that in her previous life, Yan Yu held the position of Demon Empress, performing her duties every day and maintaining power. Turning her attention to his condition, she noticed that the injury he had received was minor compared to previous cases, and with genuine concern asked if the scratch on his neck bothered him. With a grateful smile, Ian hastened to assure her that he felt no pain, trying to calm the girl and show that her concern in itself had already brought him relief and confidence. Watching her return to her hatchets and knives with obvious interest after finishing treating the wound, he couldn't help but think that in this place, even familiar things carried a strange sense of unease. The contrast between her fascination with the weapon and the way she carefully applied the pig-face patch to his skin was particularly striking, giving the situation an unexpectedly soft tone. Confusion and slight surprise mingled in his gaze as he watched Yu Xing genuinely rejoice at the opportunity to help, as if this simple gesture held special meaning for her. Bowing deeply, Ian tried to express all his gratitude, putting into this gesture respect and appreciation for the care she had shown him without hesitation. As he was leaving the room, he gently asked her not to overwork herself and wished her a peaceful rest, addressing his fifth younger sister with genuine warmth, unaware of someone's presence around the corner. In the shadows of the corridor, Yu Wanning calmly drank straight from the bottle, without giving herself away by any movement or sound, observing what was happening with an indifferent detachment that seemed at first glance. With a slight smile, she noted to herself the cloying softness of their conversation, perceiving what she saw as further confirmation that the day, filled with friendship and warm feelings, had ended successfully. Left alone, John headed into the night forest and walked slowly among the dark trees, while the moon shone quietly above him, as if watching his thoughts about the hidden danger of the valley in which he found himself. Trying to keep his mind clear, the boy clung to the remnants of common sense, realizing that the longer he remained in this frightening place, the higher the risk, and therefore his mind persistently pushed him to leave as soon as possible. However, this decision was not simple, and feeling the growing tension, he involuntarily clenched his fists, as if trying to hold back his scattered thoughts and cope with the internal discord. On the one hand, he faced an obvious threat that permeated the entire valley, while on the other, the promised reward seemed incredible, so great that it was difficult to even imagine it without a doubt. Alternating between calculation and fear, he mentally returned to the money, then again recalled the forces surrounding him, whose origins frightened him, and this tossing and turning only increased the feeling of insecurity. As soon as he imagined each of those with whom he would have to interact, disturbing images arose in his imagination, and even the ordinary traits of their behavior took on a threatening hue. Gathering his will into a fist and forcing himself to stop this stream of doubts, Ian finally made a decision, feeling how the intention not to retreat in the face of the pressure of circumstances was gradually strengthening inside him. The image of Yuxing's room, where behind her soft smile was hidden a whole array of frightening instruments, came to mind, and the thought that all of this could be used against him sent a chill down his spine. Going through the arguments one by one, the young man came to the simple and disturbing conclusion that no amount of money was worth it if he could not save his own life, and therefore safety must come before any benefits. Suddenly, his hand reached into his pocket and taking out his ID card, the guy glanced at it for a moment, then smiled faintly, perceiving this gesture as a sign urging him to run. Almost instantly, the decision became final, and with it the oppressive tension disappeared, as if this very object had relieved him of the need to doubt and taken the choice upon itself. Yan suddenly jumped up and ran away, encouraging himself with the thought that he could throw away the contract and forget about any obligations if his own safety was at stake. While he was trying to convince himself that breaking the agreement would not be a disaster, the crescent moon in the sky suddenly changed color, filling with a cold blue light that was alarming in its unnaturalness. Following this, black crows appeared in the sky, as if from nowhere, and their eyes casting an ominous red light gave their appearance an alarming, almost furious expressiveness. Circling above him, they surrounded the young man in a tight ring, emitting sharp cries and loudly flapping their wings, creating the feeling that he was being closely watched from all sides. Flying too close, these birds violated their usual distance, and their behavior seemed unnatural, as if before him were not wild creatures, but something subject to someone else's will. Stopping to catch his breath, Jan looked around and realized with alarm that despite his long run, he had remained in the same place, although somewhere in the distance the lights of the city were still flickering. Standing at the edge of the forest, he scratched the back of his head and came to the conclusion that he seemed to be running into an invisible barrier that could not be overcome in the usual way, no matter how hard he tried. Gritting his teeth and frowning, the boy forced himself to pull himself together, deciding not to give in to despair and to continue the fight, even if the situation seemed hopeless and confusing. Convincing himself that he did not believe what was happening, he rushed forward again, as if hoping to deceive the hidden laws of the valley and escape from the strange trap. His breathing became increasingly labored. His body felt heavier, and sweat trickled down his face as the night's running gradually sapped his remaining strength and clarity of thought. Finding himself back in the same place, the young man wearily sank to the ground among the trees, feeling his strength finally leaving him, along with any hope of a quick exit. Under the pressure of pointless attempts and accumulated fatigue, Ian felt his confidence fading inside, giving way to disappointment and a heavy feeling of hopelessness. Leaning back, he looked up at the sky and quietly asked a question into the void, trying to understand if he would remain here forever, with no chance of returning. A small purple scorpion fussed around his hands, insistently drawing his attention to itself, as if trying to interfere with his thoughts. Having climbed onto the shoulder, the creature froze for a moment, raising its blue tail with a sting, as if about to strike at the most unexpected moment. Irritated and tired, Jan brushed it off almost without looking, throwing out a harsh word about how he was already feeling bad, not paying attention to what was happening. Having fallen to the ground, the scorpion jumped to the side and froze, and even in its small form one could see displeasure, as if it was offended by such dismissive treatment. Realizing that things were getting out of control, the young man turned around abruptly, and a tense anticipation appeared in his gaze, as if he already had a premonition that something much more dangerous would appear after this moment. It was not in vain that he froze in alarm, for from behind the trees appeared a creature too huge and alien to be an ordinary animal. And the many eyes on its body only increased the feeling of impending danger. Almost instantly realizing the reason for her appearance, Jan felt fear grip his body, as it became clear that they had come to take revenge for the abandoned baby, and there was no way to avoid the consequences. Without wasting a second, the creature rushed to attack, and the young man found himself on the ground without having time to really react, feeling the danger looming over him with overwhelming force. Lying face up to the sky, he was afraid to even move, fearing to provoke another blow, and so he lay low, hoping to win at least a moment before the unknown outcome. Suddenly, another presence emerged from the dense shadows, and even the enraged creature stopped, as if sensing an alien force that had disrupted the course of events. Slowly emerging from the darkness, a familiar figure appeared before him, and Yang immediately recognized it as Unemployed, the ancient goo spirit whose appearance instantly changed the atmosphere around him. Without a trace of softness, she addressed the young man, sharply reminding him that his attempt to escape was already known, and the teacher ordered that his every step be closely watched. Turning her gaze to the creature, the girl coldly gave an order, demanding that the fugitive be immediately returned to the dormitory as if it were something ordinary and insignificant. Now the place no longer seemed like a quiet refuge, and under the cover of night, the former feeling of calm disappeared, giving way to an oppressive wariness. In a dark room with no light sources, there were two people, where Ian lay unconscious, and next to him sat his boss, slowly exhaling smoke and watching him with cold calm. Opening his eyes with difficulty, he quietly said that he was sure of his death, and there was a mixture of surprise and weariness in his voice. Finding Yu wanting with his gaze, he felt a new surge of fear, even though she was only silently blowing smoke upward, showing no obvious threat or concern. Standing up abruptly, Jan gathered his strength and firmly declared his intention to leave, trying to put all the pent-up determination into his words. In response, she simply smiled and calmly reminded him of all the advantages of his position, asking whether he was really ready to give it all up. Coming closer, she looked him intently in the eyes and coldly said that without her permission, he would not be able to leave this place, no matter how hard he tried. Confidently feeling her superiority, the lady added with a slight smile that this time she would limit herself to a mild punishment, although she had much harsher methods of influence at her disposal. Footsteps were heard behind him, and Ian turned toward the sound, not yet knowing what exactly awaited him or how severe the punishment would be. Shwanji appeared in front of him, tense and cold, holding the snake in her hands as confidently as if it posed no danger to her. Even the one who had seemed friendly and open at the first meeting now looked different, and clutching a dagger in his hand, he no longer resembled a person who could be trusted. With difficulty accepting what he saw, Yang noted that even Yu Xing, who had recently been gentle and caring, was now holding one of the frightening instruments in her hands, and her previous image seemed to have dissolved without a trace. No less alarming was Yan Yu, who had been cold towards him from the start, but now stood there with obvious anger, allowing the dark energy to thicken in her palm, giving it an ominous hue. When he stood before them, he clearly felt a threat from each of them, and the fear was so strong that his eyes filled with tears that he could no longer hold back. Almost unnoticed, Yu Wanning appeared behind him, and leaning closer, quietly whispered that everyone here was kind and pleasant, but it was still not worth upsetting them, and this sounded like a hidden warning. At the same moment, the system notified the guy that his acquaintance level with his boss had increased, and along with this, a clarification appeared that it would be better not to irritate her, as if confirming the seriousness of the situation. Morning arrived regardless of the night's events, and now John was already sitting at the table, as if everything that had happened was just a heavy echo left behind. He bent over the paper, concentrated, and took notes, carefully writing out the lines as if trying to organize his thoughts and preserve his experience in a comprehensible form. At the top of the page, he noted the date, and the numbers pointed to the 23rd of March, 2024, a reminder of the passage of time outside of what was happening. Beginning his account, John wrote that he was forced to stay for another week, and during this time it became clear that he did not have any special abilities associated with this place. Continuing, he noted that the third younger brother turned out to be a true master of swordsmanship, and this discovery made a strong impression on him. The events of recent days when the long-haired youth was training on the roof of the dormitory came back to him, and these scenes unfolded before his eyes again, like a living memory. Then his face remained completely calm, not a single feature trembled, and his violet eyes expressed concentration and firm determination. Taking a stable stance, he moved confidently and precisely, cutting through the air with smooth movements, as if sensing its density and shape. Wen wielded the blade with ease, moving as if the weapon had no weight, and maintaining balance at a height was a natural task for him. Finishing the movement, he brought the long blade behind his back and froze in the final stance, demonstrating complete mastery of the technique and control over every gesture. Despite the absence of an opponent, the guy looked satisfied, and a short laugh escaped him, as if confirming his inner satisfaction. At that moment, the headmistress's voice was heard, displeased with the noise, and the young man dropped his weapon in surprise, disturbing the peace of the training session. Observing what was happening, John went out onto the porch and called out to him, asking him to be quieter so as not to disturb his rest. He added with concern that otherwise the boss would go upstairs herself, hinting at consequences that were best avoided. Hearing this, the black-haired youth jumped down without hesitation, landing lightly as if such movements required no effort from him. Dropping to one knee, he looked confident and collected, and the light wind swayed his hair, giving his image a special expressiveness. Wen apologized calmly, noting that he had not intended to cause any inconvenience, and his voice sounded sincere and even. Without undue pride, he added that during training he used only a small part of his capabilities, as if it were something ordinary. With a gentle expression on his face, the young man explained to Ian that the key to mastery lies in consistency and perseverance, which is why he regularly hones his skills. Listening to him, Yan thought that if even a small part of his power looked so impressive, then in ordinary life, this man could be considered the best in his field. Maintaining a serious expression and a direct gaze, the violet-eyed youth extended his hand to Ian, calmly informing him that according to the rules, he was obliged to challenge him, as if it were something completely natural. With an awkward smile, Ian quickly explained that his skills were far from combat, and although he was well-versed in construction, he had neither the inclination nor the experience for fighting. However, his comrade clearly did not take this seriously, and his gaze showed distrust, because the very thought of such weakness seemed impossible to him. Recalling his previous life, the Sword King noted that his mentors were the teacher's best students, and if she called Yan an older brother, then this was a person with exceptional abilities. Outraged by this conclusion, Yan quickly showed off his textbooks, trying to prove that he was only involved in construction and had nothing to do with martial arts. With a confused expression on his face, the black-haired swordsman accepted the books and looked closely at the titles, as if trying to find hidden meaning in them. Turning away, Ian continued speaking, suggesting that he had not ended up here by chance, but to help this place cope with some problem about which he knew nothing yet. With a touch of irony, he called himself a nanny, noting the strangeness of the situation where an ordinary person is forced to look after creatures whose powers go far beyond comprehension. Hearing this, the young man came to his own conclusion, deciding that if his elder brother was able to observe all of them, then his power exceeded the capabilities of each of those present. With a glint of admiration in his eyes, he almost pleadingly declared that from now on he would strive for the same restraint and inner strength, taking Yan as an example. This reaction took Jan by surprise, and he tried to understand his comrade's train of thought in confusion, unable to find a logical explanation for his conclusions. At this point, the system reminded him of itself again, announcing that his level of familiarity with Yuan had increased, adding that despite his outstanding talent, he was poorly versed in social nuances. Confused by this unexpected naivety, John felt a slight sympathy, noting to himself that behind the external confidence lurked a rather simple and sincere nature. Holding back his emotions, he advised Yuan not to show off his abilities to everyone, trying to convey the idea of the need for caution. Raising his index finger, he wanted to continue the explanation and add one more detail, but did not have time to finish the thought. Almost immediately, an unexpected conclusion followed. One must hide one's strength in order to become invisible, as if dissolving among those around one. With obvious awkwardness, John tried to correct him, carefully explaining that the meaning was slightly different and that this was not what was being discussed at all. Meanwhile, Yun had already taken out a notebook and began writing down what he had heard, linking the advice to the behavior of the characters in the stories he had read. Realizing what was happening, Ian felt a thrill, for it seemed that his words were being perceived as instructions, capable of guiding those whose power seemed almost limitless. With a satisfied look, the Sword King put the notebook away, sending it into a gap that appeared out of thin air, which served as a kind of storage for him. Suddenly, the third brother asked with keen interest what it was like to be among ordinary people. Carefully watching Ian's reaction, running his hand through his long hair, he admitted that he had never been among people since his reincarnation and asked to be accompanied to this unfamiliar world. Lost in thought, Yang remembered that such creatures outside the valley were under strict control to prevent the manifestation of their power. Comparing this with what he had seen before, he realized that even a small part of Yuan's capabilities looked terrifying, and that it would be extremely difficult to keep such power within limits. With noticeable persistence in his voice, the youth was already asking him to help him get beyond the valley, at least for a short while, not hiding his sincere desire to see another world. With a trembling voice and shining eyes, Yuan continued to plead, assuring that without this opportunity, he would remain a naive provincial who had never known the world outside the valley. Covering his face with his hand, Ian tried to collect his thoughts, wondering why even he was succumbing to his comrade's charm, despite all the strangeness of what was happening. Suddenly, his gaze changed dramatically, and he opened his eyes wide as if at that moment something completely unexpected and out of the flow of the conversation had happened. A softly glowing halo appeared above Yuan's head, emitting a light that seemed almost tangible, and the image left Yan momentarily at a loss. Sometime later, sitting alone, Jan returned to this conversation again, slowly twirling his pen between his fingers and considering a possible solution. His thoughts were confused, clashing caution with advantage, because despite the risk, such a trip could strengthen his relationship with the King of Swords. Leaning sharply against the table, the guy finally decided to try to discuss this with his boss, hoping to raise the issue when he requested leave. As he stretched his stiff muscles, Yang considered the conditions under which he would agree to the trip, and he realized that it would require an agreement on complete control over Yuan's behavior. Meanwhile, his boss sat in her chair with a tired and detached look, as if what was happening around her did not concern her at all. A red-haired girl stood nearby, concentrating on shaking a vessel in which unknown ingredients were being mixed. With a slight smile, she assured me that it was worth waiting a little while for the mixture to reach the desired state, and there was confidence in her voice. From behind the closed door came John's voice, politely asking if he could come in, trying to maintain formality. Keeping his composure, he continued, explaining that he wanted to take time off for an important event and tried to speak clearly and confidently. Hearing him, both girls turned around, and while Yu Xing showed interest, her boss remained indifferent to what was happening. While the young man had not yet entered, the girl carefully moved the glass closer to her mistress, hinting at her preferences, which she knew better than anyone else. The first thing Yan noticed upon crossing the threshold was this glass, and it became obvious to him that Yu Xing had another unexpected talent. He frowned as he carefully surveyed the situation, trying to understand how accurately he was assessing what was happening and the hidden details of the situation. Watching Yu Xing's helpful behavior, the boy couldn't help but think that their internal organizational system sometimes resembled a rigid hierarchy. Without showing any unnecessary emotion, the boss handed him a form, briefly ordering him to fill it out if he really intended to take time off. Taking the document, Jan noted its simplicity, as it only required the dates and reason, and the form looked quite ordinary despite the surrounding environment. Yuan watched his reaction with a faint smile, noting to herself that in all her time working here, no one had ever asked for a vacation before, and this sight seemed almost funny to her. Meanwhile, Yan began filling out the form with noticeable diligence, carefully writing the lines and trying not to make a single mistake, as if the outcome of the entire conversation depended on it. After finishing the recording, he looked up and said that the third younger brother had also asked to be taken along, trying to speak confidently. Continuing with enthusiasm, Yang tried to convince his boss by describing Yuan's sincere desire to see the outside world and go beyond the valley. With her head slightly bowed and her hand resting on her arm, Yu Wanning thoughtfully repeated what she had heard, as if weighing the meaning of this request. A shadow of disappointment flashed across her gaze and she stared ahead in silence for a moment, considering her decision without haste. The girl standing next to him also changed her expression, and a mixture of confusion and hidden tension could be seen in her expression. Feeling the silence growing heavy, Ian couldn't help but suspect that there might be something hidden behind that name that he didn't yet know about. Finally, the pause broke, and the boss simply handed him the sheet, asking him to fill out the form for the third younger brother as well. This time, the simplicity of the document no longer brought the same relief, as John had expected a more expressive reaction to his proposal. Maintaining her previous pose, the teacher looked up at the girl standing next to her and calmly noted that her father was looking for her. Without further ado, she added that if she wanted to meet him, she would have to go with her older brother. Continuing in the same cold tone, the young lady mentioned that her father had announced his imminent death and therefore wanted to see his daughter. Hearing this, the girl noticeably changed, and the usual liveliness in her face disappeared, giving way to a severe internal shock. Noticing her hesitation, Yu Wanning calmly added that the choice was hers, and if she wanted, she could stay without being pressured. The news was too heavy for Yu Ting to bear, and she lowered her head as if she suddenly felt a weight fall on her shoulders. Trying to cope with the overwhelming feelings, she nervously clutched the hem of her shorts, betraying her excitement with trembling movements. Having gathered her strength, the little girl firmly declared that she would go with her older brother because she intended to find her mother. The boss looked at Ian with satisfaction and looked as if she had just achieved the desired result without much effort. To lighten the mood, the older brother smiled awkwardly and said he would be happy to take her with him, trying to sound calm and supportive. In an attempt to diffuse the excessive softness of the situation, Yu Wanning suddenly changed her tone and sternly reminded him that she had forgotten to give the guy an important task, and her voice once again sounded its usual demanding. Handing him a sheet of paper with responsibilities, she strongly advised him to study it carefully, because now he would have to answer not only for himself, but also for the two younger ones. Without looking away, the boss added that any violation or trouble on their part would fall on his shoulders, making it clear how serious his role was becoming. As he read the text, Jan caught himself with a strange feeling, as if he were not an employee, but an inexperienced sailor who had been entrusted with too much responsibility. Soon the trio found themselves at the station, where the clean air mixed with the smell of the road, and Jan hurried his companions, trying not to linger without reason. One moved confidently ahead, setting the pace, while the other two barely kept up with him, trying not to lag behind even a step. Without hesitation, he placed the cart on the terminal, as if he had done this before, and his actions looked familiar and confident. With noticeable enthusiasm, the black-haired handsome man called the others to move faster, clearly anticipating the long-awaited opportunity to leave the valley. Watching this, John felt bewildered because he could not understand where he got such confidence and knowledge of what was happening. As if he had sensed his thoughts, Yuan explained that he had prepared for the trip in advance, but his explanation was vague and did not inspire complete confidence. The train rushed forward, leaving behind the valley, forests, and areas where the cultivators lived, gradually carrying them further and further away. The long journey was tiring, and the 8 hours dragged on slowly, until by the time the road had worn off and night had already fallen outside the windows. Having settled himself comfortably, Yang fell asleep with his eye mask on, while Yu Xing next to him looked tense and lost in her thoughts. Pretending not to notice, the young man still watched her out of the corner of his eye, wondering why she was so worried if she had previously spoken of her dislike for her father. Deciding not to interfere, the guy chose to remain silent, allowing her to be alone with her feelings. With each passing hour, the girl's anxiety became more noticeable, and moisture appeared in her eyes, which the red-haired girl could hardly contain. Early in the morning, the train stopped and the flow of passengers began to disperse along the platform, dissolving into their routes. Yu Hing was the first to come out, and her posture showed how difficult this journey was for her, as if an invisible burden was pressing on her shoulders. Those around them moved forward silently with their things, and a tension hung between the three companions, which no one was in a hurry to break. Finally, Yuan spoke quietly, expressing concern for his sister's well-being, noting that she had not slept a wink all night. Resisting the urge to continue the conversation, Ian put his finger to his lips and quietly hinted that it was better to discuss such topics later and further away, trying not to disturb the already tense girl. However, Yuan did not attach any importance to this gesture and calmly added that he had long suspected Yu Xing's special position, considering her to be the adopted daughter of their mentor. Having spent more than 10 years in the valley, he noted that during all this time, his younger sister never tried to leave this place, as if she had no reason to leave. Developing this thought, the Sword King admitted that for a long time he perceived her as an orphan, because it seemed as if nothing was holding her back in the world outside the valley. Hearing this, the elder brother became immersed in thought, assuming that since she was trying to find her mother, she might have once gone here, trying to hide from her father. Despite the gravity of their conversations, the day remained clear and sunny, as if the outside world did not notice the internal tension of the trio. Suddenly, Yuan called out to his older brother with childish delight, trying to draw his attention to something that seemed surprising to him. Tired from the road and his thoughts, Jan responded indifferently, not expecting to see anything special. The reason for the delight turned out to be a black car, which the dark-haired hero pointed to with obvious admiration, not hiding his interest. Both froze, looking at what was happening around them, noticing the crowd of people and not understanding what exactly had attracted so much attention here. The parking lot was lined with rows of identical luxury cars glittering in the sun, and their sheer number was unusual. Even Yan, accustomed to the strangeness of this world, was involuntarily surprised as he peered closely at what was happening in front of them. A crowd gathered around the cars, but while the young men were amazed, the girl remained detached, as if what was happening had nothing to do with her. Stepping back a little, Jan suggested that perhaps filming was taking place here, since it was difficult to explain what was happening otherwise. There were quiet conversations among the passengers, and many wondered who was being greeted with such pomp, assuming the arrival of an important person. At this time, the girl was standing in front, and three men in formal suits were already heading towards her, confidently making their way through the crowd. Scratching his head, Ian admitted that this was hardly a filming, and most likely everything was prepared for the sake of meeting someone truly significant. The next moment, his gaze changed abruptly, and his surprise became so strong that he did not immediately realize what was happening. It turned out that all this luxury was intended for Yu Xing, because one of the men had already bowed before her in greeting. Greeting her with restraint, the man with a neat beard announced that the elder lady was already waiting for a meeting, and his voice sounded emphatically respectful. Realizing that the girl he knew had just been called the second mistress, Yang instinctively retreated, as if suddenly in front of him was not a fragile acquaintance, but something unattainable. The confusion in her gaze quickly disappeared, giving way to a firm determination, and she seemed to accept the inevitable, realizing that the moment had come to face the past. Not wanting to prolong the awkward silence, the guy gently reminded them to hurry, as the wait was already becoming indecently long. Turning to them, the girl said goodbye, trying to sound confident, but in her voice there was a hidden reluctance to part and leave. Succumbing to the pressure of the situation, Ian merely nodded in response, accepting her words without objection, although a feeling of incompleteness remained inside. At this time, Yuan, having a different perception of what was happening, took a step forward, and his movement clearly showed an intention to intervene. Putting his hands in his pockets and standing in front of her, he asked in a reserved but noticeably determined tone if she needed help, not hiding his displeasure. In response, the girl smiled softly and thanked him for his concern, but calmly declined, assuring him that she could handle it herself and there was no reason to worry. Meanwhile, the escort was barely hiding his impatience, since all the preparations for her meeting were being dragged out unnecessarily. Realizing that she had no choice, the girl slowly moved forward, allowing her escorts to lead her to the car, as if accepting a forced decision. There was already a man waiting for her inside the car, and his presence was felt more through tension than through movement. Looking inside, Yuxing recognized the girl sitting there and quietly called her big sister, as if the word itself was difficult. Without looking up from her work, she coldly reported that their father was dying after the attack, and her voice sounded distant and dry. Under this pressure, the red-haired girl immediately lowered her gaze, accepting what she heard without objection, as if she had no right to her own reaction. From the sidelines, two young men simply watched as she was placed in a luxury car, unable to find a way to intervene in what was happening. As he watched, Yuan noticed the internal tension emanating from the situation and realized that what was happening was not as simple as it seemed. Reflecting on what he had seen, Ian came to the conclusion that the girl's relationship with her family was far from warm, and this realization left a heavy mark on him. Meanwhile, the car had already started moving, taking with it the girl, whose state was far from calm and confident. As the entire column of cars moved along, the road became filled with glitter and movement, creating an impression of power and influence. Sitting inside, the girl looked lost, as if she had found herself in a place that she no longer perceived as her own and was trying to collect her thoughts. Left on the sidewalk, the boys were silent for a while, until Yuan broke the silence by unexpectedly telling the story of how his brother's engagement was broken off due to the loss of developmental abilities. Without really listening to the details, Yan grasped the main point, realizing that Yuxing's worries were not connected to her father's illness, but to much deeper family ties. Meanwhile, curious onlookers were already gathering around, and the quiet conversations gradually filled with caustic speculation about what kind of company her family owned. Hearing that they were talking about the largest technology corporation, the older brother could not hide his surprise, because it was almost impossible to imagine such a thing about the girl he knew. At that moment, the system caught his attention by sending a signal that made him turn away from other people's conversations and focus on the new notification. A window with additional information appeared in front of him, where the girl's dossier now clearly indicated her origin and marital status. Seeing the mention of her older sister taking over as the head of the company, Yang was even more shocked to realize the scale of what was happening. He was brought out of his thoughts by Yuan's voice, who, tired of standing idle, asked about their future plans. Trying to pull himself together, John replied that he would first head to the university and suggested that his companion stay at an inexpensive hotel nearby where they could spend the night in peace. However, immediately after that, he became thoughtful, analyzing the behavior of the Sword King and trying to understand if there was something more hidden behind his image. Without delay, the student voiced his guess, assuming that if he was a hero, then he must have a corresponding hidden side. In response, Yuan only smiled calmly and admitted that, other than his swordsmanship, he had no resources or wealth. Almost immediately, the Sword King approached his elder brother, looking at him with anticipation, as if he was about to make a request that did not require unnecessary words. Maintaining a naive appearance, he added that in his haste he had forgotten to take the money, being completely focused on the trip. This confession took John by surprise, because such a turn of events was unexpected even in light of everything he had experienced. Looking closely at the face of the young man opposite him, he tried to catch signs of deception, but found nothing that would indicate insincerity. Keeping his cool on the outside, he merely remarked that it was now clear why the luggage was so light, although inside he was already aware of the scale of the problem. Gradually, a chain of conclusions formed in his head, leading to the idea that he would have to bear the cost, given the danger and the position of his companion. However, he then realized that such a decision would cost him too much, and this caused internal discontent. Having found a way out, the young man began his explanation by saying that he himself had not yet received his salary, hinting at the limitations of his capabilities. Yuan repeated the words about salary with a slight puzzlement, as if he had never encountered the very idea of compensation for work, and there was genuine surprise in his tone. John narrowed his eyes and looked at him carefully asking if he had received payments, trying to understand how secure this place was. Scratching the back of his head and smiling, the dark-haired handsome man tried to defuse the situation, assuring that the money had definitely been credited, but that no one did bookkeeping on weekends. However, Jan was already beginning to suspect something was wrong, mentally admitting that he could have been deceived, and only outside the valley did he allow himself to entertain such a thought. Holding back his irritation, he closely examined the cultivator's face, trying to catch signs of insincerity, but he found no obvious evidence of deception. Having convinced himself that everything would be fine with his payments, the older brother took out his phone and said that he would now arrange for accommodation. In an even voice, he turned to his neighbor, Sun Shin, asking if there was room in the dorm for one more person. Hearing the calm agreement, the student who returned home felt relieved, and at that moment, everything seemed completely solvable and even encouraging. Soon the dormitory building appeared before them, monotonous and a little oppressive, with identical lines creating a feeling of strict order. Students gathered at the entrance, talking with interest, not hiding their embarrassment and curiosity. As soon as Yuan passed by, attention shifted to him, and admiring voices filled the air, accompanied by frank compliments. Moving forward with an empty suitcase, he initially did not react to what was happening, maintaining a calm expression on his face. However, the boy soon began to respond to the attention, smiling and winking, allowing himself to enjoy his unexpected popularity. Watching this, Jan felt a slight irritation, noting to himself that this attitude was clearly not doing him any good. Turning around and not seeing him nearby, he called out to Yuan, pulling him out from the circle of captivated girls. Walking down the long corridor, the guy said that they were lucky because one of the rooms was freed up due to the tenant leaving. He added with a smile that now the King of Swords would be able to stay with him on the same campus, which would make the situation much easier. Genuinely delighted, he made a gesture of victory, perceiving this as a successful start to a new life outside the valley. Early in the morning, the silence of the room was broken by the insistent sound of the alarm clock, showing 5 o'clock, when the city had not yet woken up. Already alert and full of energy, Yuan glanced at the sleeping Yang, clearly disapproving of his calm inaction. Without responding to the signal, Jan continued to sleep, completely immersed in sleep and not noticing anything around him. Not one to back down, the Sword Emperor leaned closer and insistently announced that it was time to get up, intending to engage him in morning training. With an effort, Ian lifted his heavy eyelids and stared at the phone screen, lazily dissatisfied, realizing that it was only 5 in the morning, and for him, this time almost felt like the middle of the night. Yuan objected with alarm in his voice, insisting that it was already too late, since the purest energy of heaven and earth was available precisely around 4, when the world was just awakening. Fighting back his weariness, the irritated boy gently placed his hand on his head and tried to explain that outside the valley, such training could attract unnecessary attention. Unwilling to give in, he stubbornly continued to insist, claiming that without daily practice, his strength would gradually begin to fade. With his lips pressed into an almost childish plea, he complained that he could already feel the slow decline as the others grew stronger, and that this would prevent him from reaching the top. Trying to block out the persistent words, Ian turned on his side and threw over his shoulder that there was no need to worry about it at all. Yuan, clearly offended, settled into a sitting position in the air, as if there was an invisible support beneath him, and continued to watch him. Without opening his eyes, the older brother added with displeasure that instead of complaining, it would be better to lie down again and give himself a rest. However, he approached again, persistently addressing him as an older brother, as if thereby strengthening his requests. Ignoring the irritation, the black-haired guy continued to repeat the address, as if deliberately testing the patience of the sleeping man. With each passing second, his voice became more insistent, and the tension in the room grew like a taut string. Finally, Ian opened his eyes, no longer pretending to be asleep, and there was already obvious displeasure in his gaze. Suppressing his anger and fatigue, he sat up abruptly on the bed, fixing the guy opposite him with a heavy gaze in which irritation was clearly felt. But the third younger brother did not retreat, continuing to look at him with a sincere, almost naive request, not noticing or ignoring the mood. They looked at each other in silence for long minutes until Jan finally gave in and let out a sigh of obvious annoyance. At that moment, it seemed to him that in front of him was not a formidable master, but a persistent puppy who simply did not know how to retreat. Although he had already resigned himself to the inevitability of getting up, irritation still smoldered inside, poisoning the beginning of the day. Forcing a smile, Jan offered to take him to boxing training, trying to make it look like a compromise. Hearing this, Yuan instantly perked up and accepted the offer with genuine joy, not noticing the hidden meaning. It was quiet and cool on the empty site. The first rays of light had not yet touched the ground, and there was not a soul around except them. Without much desire to participate, the student stood to the side, lost in thoughts about his work and the unpaid money, feeling tired of everything that was happening. Pausing his training, the Sword King turned around and thanked him with sincere gratitude, clearly enjoying the opportunity to train. However, there was a hidden heaviness in the older brother's appearance, and from his drooping shoulders, it was clear that something was truly troubling him. With difficulty containing the heaviness in his chest, the older brother Nanny felt insignificant and lost, as if all his efforts had dissolved without a trace, leaving only fatigue and a bitter aftertaste, turning work into a source of inner pain and doubt. Unable to bear the mounting pressure of his thoughts and self-pity, he suddenly jerked when a system notification flashed before his eyes, insistently demanding his attention and seeming to tear him out of his viscous state. It became clear almost immediately that the system had increased Yuan's favorability by adding half a point and explaining that training together would make the young man's attitude noticeably warmer and less distant. The Sword Emperor's updated dossier included a new detail, which spoke of a strict morning training habit, without which he began to feel anxious about his own strength. Trying to comprehend what he saw, Jan had a hard time understanding how such contradictory traits could coexist in one person, because before him stood a sword genius with no life experience, but with an anxious dependence on discipline. Still, joy prevailed, because the opening of the favor system meant access to a portion of the Sword Emperor's power, albeit insignificant, but already giving hope for changing one's own situation. As if responding to his guest, the system confirmed his assumption and unexpectedly called Yan the owner, which sounded strange, but at the same time encouraging. Unable to contain his impulse, he rushed towards the young man, hugging him and loudly promising to train together every day, accompanying him everywhere, and never deviating from this decision. Looking puzzled at the sudden change, Yuan did not pull away, but did not return the hug either, too surprised by his older brother's sudden burst of enthusiasm. Having completed their training, the boys headed to the dining room without further ado, where, after their exhausting efforts, food seemed a necessary and well-deserved continuation of the day. Continuing to mentally return to future training, Yang persistently asked his aunt to put in some stewed pork, imagining how soon he would try out the sword technique. The woman in the chef's uniform held a ladle with a cold expression on her face, reluctant to fulfill the request, considering the young man's tone too harsh and lacking in respect. Catching the eye, the meat exuded steam and a rich aroma, filling the dining room with a warm scent that involuntarily whetted the appetite. Carefully scooping up a portion, the cook held up pieces, perfectly cut and soaked in sauce, the sight of which made Jan barely contain his saliva. However, the memory of his rudeness did not allow her to simply fulfill his request, and the decision to punish the young man arose almost immediately. With a frown on her face, she brought the ladle down sharply, putting all her strength into the movement, as if wanting to express her displeasure without words. The impact caused the neat pieces to lose their shape, turning them into something formless and unattractive, more reminiscent of a failed dish. Instantly losing its appetizing appearance, the pork turned into mush, causing Jan to doubt whether it was even edible. Without answering the unspoken question, The woman was already calling the next one, as if the situation did not require any explanation at all. Urging the student, she ignored his expression, showing no sympathy for his disappointment. The young man standing behind was holding a lush rose in his teeth, which looked unusual and immediately attracted the attention of those around him. Noticing the flower, the cook involuntarily softened, perceiving it as a rare gesture of respect to which she was not accustomed. Despite her age, the woman heard the young man address her affectionately, calling her little sister and asking for food in a soft voice. Embarrassed by this tone, she blushed and generously served the portions, offering more with a sincere desire to please. Wanting to completely charm her, the young man continued to assure her of his youth and beauty, saying this with a slight smile. The contrast between his gentleness and Jan's rudeness was striking, making the cook's attitude even more obvious. The person in line ahead, looking at his plate with annoyance, watched what was happening, amazed at how easily attitudes towards people changed. Sitting silently opposite each other, the young men ate, one with a vague porridge, the other with a generous portion of aromatic meat. Closing his eyes in pleasure, the Sword King calmly enjoyed his food, not thinking about what was happening around him. Feeling irritated, Jan involuntarily envied the ease with which any door opened for the young man. Comparing their fates, he felt secondary, deprived even of the right to simple rest. Breaking the silence, Yuan offered to try his portion, calmly moving the plate closer. When they left the dining room, they were full and satisfied, especially Yuan, who had never eaten so much here before. Remembering Yuan's care, he felt grateful and thought that being next to such a person was already a great fortune. Stopping outside, John turned around and reminded him about his diploma defense on Friday, suggesting that the young man go shopping on his own. In response to what he heard, the young cultivator silently extended his open palm, holding it in front of Jan, and in this gesture, one could read a request, the meaning of which at first remained unclear and caused only bewilderment. With a slight smile, as if explaining the obvious, he calmly said that in the world of people, it is impossible to get by without money, thereby directly hinting at his need and expecting a simple reaction. Not rushing to give in, Jan cautiously noted that if he didn't have cash, he could use the phone, hinting that this would save him from unnecessary expenses. Ignoring the hidden irritation, Yen put on an innocent expression and reminded him that the teacher had called Yan his guardian, who was allowed to fulfill any request. Seeing no way out of the situation, the King of Swords' guardian reluctantly handed over the bill, experiencing internal resistance, but understanding that refusal would only complicate their interaction. His inner discontent was intensified by the fact that even this sum seemed significant to him, since every expense felt like the loss of something important. Without any embarrassment at all, Wen quickly took the money and thanked her, as if it was natural and didn't require any extra thought. The student turned away in irritation and walked away, deciding to focus on preparing for his defense, leaving the young man alone in front of the university. Without wasting any time, Yuan was already ordering something on his phone, without thinking about the cost or attaching any importance to the amount received. Soon a dark car, which he had called just a moment ago, drove up to the university, which looked unexpected and even a little impressive. He climbed inside with obvious enthusiasm, anticipating how pleasantly he would spend time away from his usual activities. As soon as he had settled into the car, the young man heard a polite voice announcing the cost of the trip to the center, which was 70 yen. Having settled himself comfortably, Yuan calmly agreed to the terms and stated that he would pay in cash without the slightest hesitation. Having received confirmation, the car moved smoothly and headed toward the center, following the specified address without unnecessary delays. Gradually, skyscrapers rose up before him, creating a dense atmosphere where everyone hurried and worked, as if obeying the invisible rhythm of the city. A bored employee sat at the entertainment center's counter, lazily observing the empty hall. There were almost no customers in the middle of the day. Soon a guy entered, came closer, and politely greeted the worker, breaking the usual silence. With an open smile, Yun asked for 30 coins to play a game called Dragon Slayer, sounding casual. The employee, barely moving his lips, named the price and indifferently clarified the method of payment, showing no interest. Without hesitation, Yun placed the money on the counter, clearly indicating that he intended to pay in cash. While counting the bills, the seller thought that these coins would only last for a few minutes, and he was frankly too lazy to start the machine. Looking at the smiling young man with doubt, he mentally considered him naive, not understanding why he was spending money so senselessly. However, with a sigh, the employee nevertheless led him to the machines and showed him how to start the game, performing his duties without enthusiasm. Gradually, the morning light became brighter, the sun rose higher, and the soft warmth gave way to a palpable heat. Remaining at the cash register, the employee suddenly noticed that the guy had not come out, although the time had long since exceeded the few minutes that such a game usually lasts. Turning to the vending machine where he had recently taken the man was surprised to notice a dense crowd of people crowding around and did not immediately understand the reason for such an unexpected stir. The player was surrounded on all sides by visitors, loudly talking and admiring what they saw, because this game was intended as a trap for money and not as a test that could be passed. Wen remained completely calm, oblivious to the noise, his face focused and his gaze glued to the screen where the tense action was unfolding. His hands moved almost imperceptibly, his fingers flickering with such speed that the pressure merged into a continuous stream, creating the feeling that he was controlling the process effortlessly. A man standing nearby noted with amazement that with such skills the young man could achieve greatness in esports. So incredible did his reaction and accuracy seem. As he watched, the salesman remembered that successful completion required almost impossible speed, exceeding the limits of normal human capabilities. It seemed as if the guy playing had more than two hands. So quickly did the position of his fingers change, deftly switching buttons and levers without the slightest hesitation. Trying to calm himself, the worker mentally reminded himself that the machine was limited by its settings and would not allow winnings above the set limit. However, the young man did not make any mistakes, and the minutes of waiting for a possible loss dragged on painfully long, increasing the internal tension of the observer. Trying to intervene, the salesman came closer and gently suggested a pause, hoping to distract the player, who clearly had no intention of stopping. With a slight smile, Yuan replied that he was not tired at all and was ready to continue, without taking his eyes off the screen and simultaneously increasing his winnings. Calmly adding that what had happened up to this point had only been a warm-up, he further surprised those around him, emphasizing his confidence in his own abilities. Unwilling to accept what was happening, the worker approached again after a while, repeating the question about fatigue and hoping to hear a different answer. Each time he received a confident denial, he felt growing tension because the situation was getting out of control. Unable to understand how, with the given settings, the winnings had exceeded tens of thousands, the man seethed internally, realizing the scale of the possible losses. Trying to change his approach, he began to convince the young man of the harm of games, hinting at the need for rest and trying to influence him with words. To everyone's surprise, Yuan ended the game himself, and this instantly brought relief to the seller that was almost impossible to hide. Turning to the employee, he calmly stated that he was now ready to rest, as if nothing unusual had happened. With a heavy expression on his face, the worker began to lay out mountains of coins in front of him, barely containing his mixed feelings. Looking into his pocket, Yuan innocently remarked that he still had some money left and could very well play again. In an effort to quickly get rid of the dangerous client, the seller offered him a ring as a gift, hoping that the generous gesture would convince the young man to leave and stop ruining the establishment. With a satisfied smile, Yuan left the store, carrying away his impressive winnings, while the man who remained behind the counter slumped over, barely containing his despair. As he put the ring on his finger, he thought with ease about how simple and kind life was to him, as if luck itself accompanied his every step. Finding himself in the shopping center, Yuan thought with pleasure that now he would be able to please his older brother with something tasty, because the money he had won allowed him to do so. A soft smile appeared on his face, revealing a genuine desire to take care of someone else, discovering a new feeling for himself. Stretching with lazy satisfaction, the young cultivator decided to take his time and spend the remaining time searching for new entertainment, as the day was just beginning to unfold. Due to his lack of life experience, his ideas about good deeds were distorted, so he sincerely believed it was acceptable to take sweets from children for the sake of justice. Having caught the offender, the guy received a certificate for bravery, and the police officers looked at him with obvious admiration, not hiding their warm feelings. By easily lifting a heavy barbell with one finger, he surprised those around him and was rewarded with a small training kit. By the time his series of actions ended, a soft twilight had descended on the streets, and the sunset had painted the city in warm hues. Among the people leaving, Yuan stood out with a multitude of bags and a rug under his arm, slowly heading towards the exit of the shopping center. Despite the weight in his arms, he felt cheerful and was surprised at how quickly time had flown by, deciding to go somewhere to eat. Upon entering the establishment, the Sword King saw a woman in uniform bow respectfully, greeting him by name with exaggerated respect. With a slight smile, she clarified the order, and her behavior suggested familiarity, as if this guest had been here many times before. Handing the bags over to the hostess, he happily announced that he wanted to try all the new dishes not hiding his interest. The girl readily spoke about the recently prepared series of exquisite dishes, mentioning their names with professional confidence. Heading to the table, Yuan agreed to the offer, honestly admitting that he didn't understand the names and would simply trust the choice. Having received consent, the girl immediately transmitted the order to the kitchen, giving the signal to serve the first appetizers. One by one, the waiters brought the dishes, carefully placing them on the spacious table, creating an impression of abundance and order. Yuan watched calmly as everything unfolded, taking everything in as natural as he could, sitting relaxed with his eyes closed and not showing any unnecessary emotion. A generously laid table lay before him, the dishes exuded aromas, and the waiters carefully watched his every movement, pouring drinks and trying to please the guest, who remained indifferent. Despite the abundance, no joy arose within the young man, because his thoughts were occupied only with fencing, and everything else seemed empty and of no value. Approaching the table, the girl with a polite smile asked where he had been for the last 2 months, not hiding her sincere curiosity. He answered calmly, saying that he had been dedicating all this time to training, and that other activities were of no importance to him, saying this in a flat and emotionless voice. Yet amidst these thoughts, the image of his older brother flashed, and the Sword King decided to take some food with him to share, showing rare consideration. Having finished his meal, he carefully wiped his lips with a napkin and asked for the remaining dishes to be collected, demonstrating restrained manners. The employee readily accepted the request and added that, as a guest of honor, he was entitled to an extra dessert, accompanying her words with a welcoming smile. Suddenly remembering something, Yuan asked for an extra serving of fruit pancakes, a detail that unexpectedly stood out from his strict image. After some thought, he also ordered a few servings of unusual dishes, believing that this would help his older brother in his preparations. Gradually, the evening gave way to night, and only a few windows of the dormitory continued to glow in the silence. Staring intently at the screen, Yang didn't notice anything around him until the door opened and Yuan walked into the room, laden with bags. Without hiding his irritation, he immediately asked about the reason for the late return, reminding him of the responsibility entrusted to him. Looking up, the older brother froze, amazed by what he saw because the number of purchases seemed completely unbelievable. With a broad smile, Yuan called him to take a break from his work and go to the kitchen, where dinner was already ready. Understanding the real value of money, John could not believe that so many things could be purchased for the amount given, and this left him perplexed. Feigning sincere innocence, the black-haired swordsman thanked him for the money and added that he himself had not expected such a successful day. Having decided not to reveal his suspicions, John chose to remain silent, although he understood that he had been deceived and that the young man was far from simple. At the same moment, the system was reactivated, sending notifications in response to new information about the satellite. The window that appeared reported a significant increase in the level of familiarity, which seemed unexpected and even strange. Next, an updated dossier was opened, in which some of the characteristics were hidden, especially data on endurance and strength. Watching the changes with bewilderment, Jan could not understand what was happening and doubted the reliability of the system. A detail on Yuan's neck caught their attention, a trace of bright lipstick, barely hidden by the collar of his clothes, which raised new questions. Not wanting to delve into the discussion, the older brother simply rolled his eyes, deciding not to waste his energy on clarification. Meanwhile, Yuan held out the container with the prepared dish, sincerely wanting to please his older brother. However, instead of gratitude, he was met with an irritated look, which clearly showed dissatisfaction with what was happening. Once thesis defenses are behind us, leaving students exhausted and tired, it's time to pack up and move out of the dorms, step by step transitioning into adulthood. While packing his suitcases, Jan's friend casually asked him where he was planning to get a job, recalling his conversations about some indestructible company. Without much enthusiasm, he replied that he planned to continue working there while packing his things with a disinterested concentration. Pointing to the trophies his younger brother had collected, the friend asked with slight bewilderment whether they were going to take all this variety with them. Imagining a long journey with bulky luggage, the guy mentally sighed wearily, feeling that he could no longer bear the weight of the role imposed by circumstances. There was a bustle near the station, crowds of people moving in different directions, each hurrying about their own business, creating a dense flow of traffic. Already gathered at the entrance marked A, the two guys were waiting for the girl, and with each passing minute, their anxiety became more and more palpable. Checking his phone, the older brother found no messages, and the anxious thoughts gradually intensified because the girl still hadn't let him know about herself. The feeling of impending haste increased because the flow of people was accelerating, which meant that the train's departure was already very close. Sitting on the floor, the Sword King turned to him and calmly suggested that he leave without her, leaving her the opportunity to get there on her own. This decision seemed reasonable only at first glance, since the lack of response to calls and messages did not indicate busyness, but rather possible problems. Not agreeing with this option, the older brother sharply objected, since they had arrived together, which meant they had to leave in the same group. Otherwise, it would feel like the loss of a loved one. Realizing the depth of his experiences, he himself was surprised at how deeply involved he became, as if he had imperceptibly taken on the role of guardian. Internally reproaching himself, the guy thought that he could have foreseen the difficulties, because the girl could have gotten lost or not found her way back. At that moment, the Sword King gently grasped his hand with his palms, trying to convey calm and support him in his growing excitement. Watching this, the younger brother did not hide his amazement, sincerely admiring how caring Yang turned out to be. Influenced by the respect and support shown, the system reactivated, preparing to communicate the changes that had occurred. The Sword King's favor had noticeably increased, and the system was quick to record this progress, as if to emphasize the significance of the moment. The total amount reached the first mark, opening up some of the possibilities, and now Yan had access to part of the Sword Emperor's power. Not believing what was happening, he blinked several times, as if trying to make sure that the numbers before his eyes were not an illusion. Continuing to watch Yuan's reaction, he tried to comprehend the sudden increase, which turned out to be much greater than expected. Looking at his hands in amazement, he tried to get used to the new reality in which his familiar body concealed a different power. Pictures had already appeared in his imagination where he could easily destroy stone barriers with these hands, feeling the attraction of power. By urging him to take action, the system offered to test the available portion of power right now, but the limitations of the world did not allow him to accept this offer. The young man was brought out of his thoughts by Yuan, who persistently pointed to the side, trying to draw attention to something important. Quickly composing himself, he turned his gaze and asked what exactly he should pay attention to, already preparing himself for the unexpected. A huge screen was broadcasting a message where two girls were standing next to each other, and one of them suspiciously resembled Yu Xing. Looking confidently into the camera, the short-haired woman announced that she was taking control of the group of companies into her own hands. In a calm voice, she explained that from now on, it would be she, Yu Qian, who would make key decisions and guide further development. Turning to her sister, the new owner added coldly that Yu Xing, a Columbia University graduate, would be her special assistant. But the girl's expression made it clear that she was not at all happy with this choice. Noticing this, Yuan chuckled softly and noted that her expression was as if she was not there by her own will, but as if she was being held back against her will. Continuing to stare at the screen, he remembered the teacher's words about the corporation, adding that this family seemed to belong to the Civet clan. Hearing this, the elder brother's expression changed dramatically, and a cold determination appeared in his gaze, replacing his previous confusion. Clenching his fist tighter, he barely contained the surge of rage, feeling the tension reach its limit and begin to cause pain. Giving in to this feeling, the guy offered to go there together, deciding that if Yu Xing was really in bad shape, they had to get her out as quickly as possible. Those around were unaware of the emerging plan, and the city continued to live peacefully, oblivious to the hidden tension. Meanwhile, the corporation's building was bathed in sunlight, and the walls were decorated with maps of the world, creating an impression of grand ambition. With a sharp movement, the girl's name escaped her sister's lips as she threw the documents down on the table with force, expressing irritation. Having settled herself in a chair, she harshly scolded the girl standing in front of her, as if she were a child, reproaching her for ingratitude and discontent. Raising her voice, she asked directly if she was laying claim to her position, and there was open aggression in this question. Lowering her head, Yu Xing quietly replied that that wasn't what she meant at all, trying not to make the situation worse. Pointing her finger sharply at her, the chairwoman demanded to know what she really wanted. Despite the lowered volume, her voice remained harsh, and she reminded them that the family was already hiding Yu Xing's origin. In response, the girl only swallowed, not finding the strength to object, and silence became the only possible answer. Without stopping, the older one continued to press, declaring that the red-haired girl's situation was only possible because of her father's illness. With cold contempt, she added that without this, the girl would not be able to count on anything more serious than a simple job. Holding back her emotions, Yu Xing only clenched her fists, trying not to let herself break down under the pressure of humiliation. With difficulty, she pulled herself together and tried to say something, but her voice sounded too quiet, lost in the tense silence. Gathering her courage, the girl raised her head and firmly said that she wanted to see her mother. The answer was quiet and cold, and there was no sympathy in it, only a hint of reluctance to return to this topic. As she continued speaking, Yu Qian didn't even look at her sister, making one harsh comment after another towards her mother. Previously reserved, Yu Xing couldn't keep silent, and her voice broke when talking about the person closest to her. Leaning forward, the older one tried to suppress her completely, reminding her of her situation and uttering the words that hurt the most. Through clenched teeth, she emphasized that the very fact of talking to her should be perceived as a favor on the part of the Civet clan family. A heavy tension hung between them, leaving no room for mutual understanding, and every glance only deepened the gap. Returning to her chair, the head of the company coldly ordered that the woman be treated as a person who no longer existed. Not agreeing with this, Yu Xing continued to stand her ground because she had once left, believing the promise of taking care of her mother. Growing emotional, she asked through tears why the desire to know about her mother's condition caused such irritation. The older woman frowned and replied that the desire itself was not the problem, but her tone remained cold and uncomprehending. Folding her arms across her chest, the short-haired sister coldly remarked that if the truth about Yu Xing's origins became known, the consequences would affect the entire family, and it would no longer be possible to avoid problems. Allowing herself a predatory grin, she added that if this became public, the clan elders would not show any leniency, and there was definitely no point in counting on leniency. Unable to find the words to respond, the red-haired girl only clenched her fists tighter, feeling increasingly powerless under the pressure. Turning to the window, the elder asked to remember one thing, and in this gesture one could read fatigue mixed with irritation. Making her voice even colder, she explained that the past didn't matter. Now Yu Xing should only consider herself as her sister, forgetting about everything else. As she continued to speak, the lady constructed a fictitious story in which every fact was distorted, creating a convenient legend that concealed the true origin. As part of the image it created, the company required them to demonstrate not just family ties, but a ostentatious closeness that reinforced the overall image. Closing her eyes for a moment, the chairwoman said wearily that repeated dissatisfaction would have consequences, hinting at the fate of the girl's mother. Unable to withstand the pressure, Yu Xing lost her strength and sank to her knees, as if she could no longer hold herself upright. A heavy silence fell between them, where one remained cold and calculating, putting reputation and profit above all else. Opposite her stood a girl with a sincere heart, for whom her loved ones meant more than any benefits, and for their sake she was ready to endure humiliation. Tears filled the eyes of the 16-year-old girl, who still needed her mother, and in a trembling voice she admitted that she had not seen her for many years. Looking up, she continued to ask, promising not to say a word, just to see her at least for a moment. In despair, the little girl was ready to give up her past and her life in the valley, just to get the opportunity to see her mother at least once. Despite the internal satisfaction of control, the elder pretended to be condescending and ordered him to rise, hiding her contempt behind outward restraint. Without showing any sympathy, she stated that a family member could not allow such behavior, continuing to press with words. Seeing it only as a means, the chairwoman ordered to use appearances and feign joy, ignoring real feelings. At that moment, there was a knock, and a man with long hair who entered found himself an unwitting witness to what was happening. Secretary Wrong Wei tried not to show that he noticed the tension and politely apologized for the intrusion. Not considering what was happening to be anything secretive, the older sister briefly replied that everything was fine, as if nothing unusual was happening in the room. Switching to a cloying tone, she stated that she understood the remorse and asked Yu Xing to stand up, trying to give the situation an appearance of normality. Carefully placing the papers, the secretary announced that this was a will drawn up by the father with the participation of a notary. Carefully studying the documents, the lady noted with surprise that even this girl was entitled to a share of the inheritance. Continuing to condemn her mother, she commented on her father's generosity, not noticing how she was once again offending the woman standing in front of her. Maintaining a businesslike tone, the man asked when he could discuss the important matter and received a short response. Having finished studying, the girl put the papers aside, deciding that talking with the secretary was more important now. She sternly pointed to the exit and ordered him to leave, reminding him of what had been said earlier and demanding that he remember every word. After leaving the office, Yu Xing stopped at the wall, trying to hold on, as if it was not her body that needed support, but her feelings. When Wrong Wei came out next, she immediately turned to him, seeing him as the last chance to change the situation. With hope in her voice, the girl begged him for help, believing that he would be the one who could influence what was happening. There was a restrained regret in his gaze, but he still replied that no one was allowed to see the lady, and these words sounded completely closed. With gentle sadness, he advised to give up trying and simply accept one situation, trying to live calmly and not go against the established order. With hope in her voice, the girl asked if he knew anything about her mother's condition, because she felt that he knew more than he was saying. With an effort to maintain his cool, The man replied that he knew nothing, although inside this decision was not easy for him. Quickly hiding his emotions, he finally pulled away, repeating that he had no information. As Yu Xing watched him go, she felt her last hope disappear, leaving behind a void. Unable to bear it, she lost her footing and sank to the floor, as if her strength had suddenly left her. Trying to hold herself up, the girl remained sitting, unable to get up, feeling tired and internal pain. Buildings towered over the city, seeming to compete with each other in height, creating a sense of spatial pressure. Approaching the counter, the guys politely greeted each other, after which Yuan said that they wanted to see Yu Xing. Smiling reservedly, the employee asked if they had an appointment and immediately warned that a meeting without one was impossible. While disagreeing, he insisted, emphasizing that personal relationships should carry more weight than formalities. Following the rules, the administrator repeated the refusal, making no exceptions even with this explanation. Increasing the pressure, the younger one voiced his request again, trying to at least achieve contact with her. Remaining calm, the worker explained that everything needed to be completed in accordance with the established requirements for the meeting. Having lost his patience, Yuan lowered his head, thinking only about the futility of trying. Looking up, he spoke sharply, stating that if they had the opportunity to sign up, they would not have come here directly. Disappointed in the words, the Sword King had already reached for his weapon, which caused alarm in the elder. Trying to smooth things over, he took a light tone, asking him to calm down. Carefully intercepting his hand, the older brother reminded him that force should not be used outside the valley, keeping him from making rash actions. Feeling the pressure, Yuan turned around in surprise as the force with which he was being restrained was unusual. In response to the respect shown, the system imperceptibly increased the indicator, recording the change in attitude. Not understanding the reason, Ian looked at the notification, not feeling any changes inside himself. Trying to read his facial expression was fruitless, as he looked carefree again. However, there was a brief moment in my memory when the expression was different, more tense and unfamiliar. A man in a formal suit with a bright tie approached the counter and asked if the person he needed was there. With the same politeness, the employee asked the same question about the recording, without changing her standard approach. In response, he calmly stated his name, declaring that this would be enough, and this time they actually let him through. Seeing this, Yuan flared up with indignation, not understanding why some were allowed and others were not. Leaning back in her chair, the employee responded dryly, hinting that she wasn't going to let just anyone in, and emphasized the difference in appearance. Another encounter with indifference finally drove him crazy, and no matter how much Jan tried to restrain his friend and calm the outburst of emotions, the tension only grew. A flash of anger was reflected in his gaze, and even his eyes filled with tension, especially the careless movement with which the girl allowed herself to roll her eyes. Almost losing his temper, the young man leaned forward, ready to resort to rudeness, but the older man managed to grab him, holding him back and at the same time hastily justifying himself to the employee. At the same time, the girl remained calm, perceiving what was happening as something insignificant, not realizing who she was dealing with and how close the danger was. The tension reached its peak when Yu Xing approached the counter, and the employee had to immediately change her expression to one of exaggerated politeness. Bowing respectfully, the administrator addressed her with due respect, as if a person of a different status stood before her. Thanks to her intervention, the issue was resolved quickly, and soon the three were sitting on the open terrace, where they could talk without unnecessary glances. Breaking the silence, Ian carefully asked if she truly agreed with what had been said publicly, sensing that there was something more behind it. As the conversation began, the younger one also ventured to speak, gently reminding her that she was planning to return with them, and his voice sounded almost plaintive. This wasn't just out of concern, as Yuan knew that with her departure, responsibility for his mentor could fall on him, and he wasn't prepared for that. Embarrassed by the attention, the girl cringed and looked away, quietly saying that she had a reason to stay. Upon hearing this, John immediately asked for more details, offering to help solve any problem, and there was genuine concern in his voice. In response, Yu Xing only lowered her eyes and remained silent, not daring to reveal the true reason. Meanwhile, behind their backs, quiet conversations could already be heard, in which they discussed the girl's origins and drew unpleasant conclusions. The gossip was unfounded, but this did not stop those around from confidently expressing their guesses. Despite the lack of evidence, their words were so harsh that they could have offended anyone in her place. These conversations did not go unnoticed, and anger flared up in Yuan's eyes again. Gripping the hilt of his sword, he declared that he would no longer tolerate such treatment. For the third time in a short time, John tried to stop him, reminding him of the rules and trying to regain control of what was happening. However, the words had little effect, and the Sword King continued to glare at those around him, promising to silence them. Having more strictly reminded about the laws, Yan pointed out the possible consequences that could follow such actions. But this did not stop the young man, and he pointed irritably at the crowd, not understanding how such behavior could be tolerated. At the same time, Yan himself felt irritated, but he understood that now it was more important to maintain safety than to give in to emotion. Trying to lighten the mood, he smiled and said that there was no point in wasting energy on those who were incapable of thinking more broadly. However, for Yuan, this did not matter, because the girl was more important to him than any consequences, and he could not remain indifferent. Gesturing with his hand, Ian tried to sit him back down, hoping to calm the tension, but the Sword King only stubbornly folded his arms and refused to obey, showing his displeasure. At this moment, Yu Xing herself decided to speak up, realizing that she could no longer remain silent. Gathering her courage, she admitted that she was indeed illegitimate and that the rumors about her mother were true. Hearing this, Yuan frowned, trying to comprehend what was said, and his anger gradually gave way to confusion. Gathering her strength, Yu Xing quietly admitted that she had come here not for her father, but only to see her mother, because worry for her safety was haunting her. Holding back tears, the little girl asked them to leave without her, explaining that she could not return until she was sure that her mother was okay. Without answering immediately, Jan stood up and walked away, briefly saying that he needed to make a call, leaving his friends at a loss. Trying to understand what was happening, the Sword King watched him closely, as if hoping to catch at least part of the conversation. Upon returning, the young man calmly sat down and reported that he had contacted the teacher. Turning to the girl with a slight smile, he said that despite the lack of explanation, they were allowed to stay longer. Continuing, the elder brother added that the mentor also asked him to keep an eye on her, as if she had foreseen the development of events in advance. In conclusion, he confidently stated that he would stay by her side and help her in her search. Only now did the guy notice the strange tension emanating from Yuan, which had previously escaped his attention. Turning around, the young man saw a face filled with tears and sincere gratitude. With difficulty containing her emotions, the girl admitted that she tried to keep her distance so as not to burden anyone, but his action turned out to be important to her. At that moment, 2 notifications flashed in front of the guy at once, attracting his attention. The readings changed, reflecting increased confidence from Yuan and a slight improvement from the girl. In his eyes, Ian appeared to be a person ready to help, and for her, he became someone she could rely on. Observing this, the young man was surprised to note how easy it was to move forward and decided to continue doing the same. Taking on a more serious appearance, he confidently said that he would do everything possible for their well-being. In response, both looked at him with genuine admiration, as if someone much more important stood before them. From that moment on, their relationship changed, and Ian ceased to be just an elder, becoming something more in their perception. Even these words once again strengthened the indicators, confirming the influence of his behavior on those around him. Realizing this, the elder brother felt joy, because he expected a long journey, but the result turned out to be much closer. However, the system did not allow him to relax, and a new notification again attracted his attention. An updated dossier appeared before her eyes, reflecting the changes and details of the girl's life. The last line caught my attention, as if it were hiding something important. It stated that a new feature was now available that allowed the use of some of the abilities. Despite the limitation, the young man felt a surge of strength, looking at his own hands in surprise. At this time, both of them looked at him with warmth, and sincere feelings could be seen in their gazes. Not understanding the reason for such a reaction, Jan directly asked what was going on and why they were looking at him like that. Embarrassed, the girl admitted that the longer she saw him, the more she liked him. In response, the guy just smiled calmly, not attaching too much importance to it. He decided to himself that the reason was not in the strength, but in the fact that his words actually found a response. Suddenly, something pulled Jan out of his train of thought, and his face reflected outright shock, as if he had encountered something completely unexpected. The reason turned out to be more than strange, because the usually reserved Yuan suddenly came close and placed his palm on his chest, breaking the usual distance. Looking away in embarrassment, he quietly noticed that Yan's chest had become very broad, and his voice sounded unusually awkward. Confused, he reacted sharply, raising his voice and demanding to know what was going on and why he was behaving this way. At that moment, the system seemed to decide to intervene, reporting that the charm skill borrowed from Yu Xing was now active. Clutching his head, the older brother realized with horror that the effect was spreading to everyone without exception, making no distinctions. Meanwhile, Yu Xing was rushing around the floors, receiving one assignment after another, and barely had time to switch between tasks. Folders flashed before her eyes, each demanding attention, and the unfamiliar bureaucracy quickly exhausted her. Requests for small tasks, such as calling a courier or delivering documents came from various sides. Trying to keep up, she took on everything at once, even when she didn't have time to fully understand each task. Moving from one employee to another, the red-haired girl delivered papers, carried out orders, and tried to remain polite. Due to the constant stress, thoughts became confused, and it seemed that even the simplest actions turned into a difficult ordeal. Suddenly, a voice appeared behind me, demanding that I urgently make tea and take it to the meeting without giving me a second's rest. Realizing that the to-do list was already overflowing, Yuxing tried to explain how many tasks still needed to be completed, but no one listened to her. Interrupting, the colleague began to make caustic remarks, hinting at her supposedly inflated opinion of herself. Unaccustomed to such a tone, the girl quickly assured that she would do everything, trying to avoid conflict. However, what was happening was not random, but part of a pre-planned scheme that she had been told about earlier. Back on the terrace, John explained that to achieve the goal, he would have to work hard and not show dissatisfaction. The idea was to create an impression of submissiveness, especially to management, and gain more freedom later. Understanding why all this was being done, the girl accepted the conditions and decided to endure any difficulties, just to get closer to the goal. Wanting to do his part, Yuan prepared several books for her in advance on how to behave in a new place, hoping that this would help her settle in faster. Sincerely supporting her, both assured her that they would be there and help her get through all the difficulties, not leaving her alone in a difficult situation. Looking into their faces, the girl tried to understand what lay ahead and how this difficult path would turn out. As she reflected on the last few days, she realized how much effort had already been put into her, and it made her feel both grateful and anxious. Having found housing near the office, Yuan managed to negotiate favorable terms, and thanks to his charm, the payment issue was resolved unexpectedly easily. When he complimented the hostess, even Yan was confused as he watched what was happening. The location chosen was important because it provided a good view, allowing one to monitor Yu Qian's movements. Realizing the scale of what was happening, the red-haired girl felt doubt for a moment, but still decided to go all the way, despite her fear. While she was thinking, a new system notification suddenly appeared before Ian's eyes. It spoke of a slight increase in the girl's favorability level. Looking at the message in surprise, the young man could not understand what exactly had caused such a change. At this time, Yuan was watching the street through binoculars and gestured for him to join him. A car appeared in sight, driven by Yu Qian, and her concentration looked suspicious. Noting the recurrence of such trips, he suggested following it, considering it important. Thinking for a moment, Ian assessed the possible consequences of such a step. The decision came quickly, and the older brother agreed, realizing that such an opportunity could not be missed. Following her, they found themselves at a small house guarded by people at the entrance. Hiding nearby, the boys carefully watched what was happening, trying not to attract attention. Thanks to his abilities, Yuan noticed what remained unnoticed and pointed out the presence of a protective field. This barrier resembled familiar techniques, but now it marked the border of the territory under the control of the association. As she stepped out of the car, the young lady maintained her usual determination, but there was a hidden tension in the overall picture, as if something disturbing was hiding behind the outward calm. Concentrating, Yuan looked closely at what was happening, trying to put together the details and understand why she needed this place. He said thoughtfully, noting that it was strange to see the head of a large company in such a remote place and with such regularity. Meanwhile, Yan turned his attention to the guards. Their appearance and behavior left no doubt that these were not ordinary people in front of him. Considering the protective barrier, the elder brother came to the conclusion that these people were also connected to the same forces as the surrounding area. Wen turned around and awkwardly started the conversation, deciding to ask the question that had been bothering him for several days. With obvious determination, he proposed to act directly, relying on his skills and wanting to resolve the situation by force. Tired of such proposals, Jan nevertheless agreed, although it was clear from his expression that he had doubts about this approach. At the same time, he immediately reminded them of the risk, because in the event of a collision, the one for whom it all began could also be hit. While not rejecting the idea entirely, the boy asked to use the weapon only with his permission, trying to maintain control. Continuing their observation, they saw the car leave the area, quickly disappearing from sight. Checking the time, Jan noted that the visit had again taken place at its usual interval, not breaking the previously observed pattern. Based on this, Yuan suggested that the key to the mystery lay within the house, rather than in the woman's behavior. As he stood up, the elder brother suggested that they return here later with Yu Xing to act more confidently. Supporting the idea, Yuan stretched his stiff muscles and remarked that the girl was lucky to have at least rare days of rest. At that moment, Jan felt alarm and began to look around, trying to understand the source of the strange sensation. His partner also felt the tension, realizing that someone else was present nearby. Hidden among the trees, the unknown observer stood very close, remaining completely unnoticed. Looking around cautiously, John quietly asked if they were being followed now. Feeling threatened, the Sword King began to draw his blade, a movement that did not go unnoticed. He did this calmly, understanding that it was acceptable to use force near a protected area. At that very second, the presence disappeared, as if dissolving into thin air without a trace. Yun was the first to notice this, as the sensation of someone else's breath suddenly disappeared. After analyzing what was happening, they came to the conclusion that either they were being followed or someone was watching the same target. In any case, it became clear that something important was hidden in this place, something that was still beyond their understanding. The house, the grounds, and the regular visits all added up to a picture that was raising more and more suspicions. After a while, they noticed increased security. There were more people at the entrance, carefully monitoring the situation. There was now constant patrolling around, aimed at identifying any outsiders. Having chosen a suitable day, the three of them took up shelter, trying to remain unnoticed. While Yan and Yuxing were watching the scene intently, Yuan was distracted by a butterfly flying past, unexpectedly becoming captivated by the sight. For the red-haired girl, the very existence of such a country house seemed incredible, because she had never heard of it before and had never been to these places. As Yuan continued to watch the butterfly's flight, Yang quietly announced that during their observations, they had managed to discover an unnoticeable way to enter the building. His brows furrowed as he gave a curt command to get ready, his voice collected and demanding, leaving no room for doubt. Having waited until the guards had dispersed a little, they cautiously approached the house, moving in short dashes from one shelter to another. While one of the guards was distracted by a conversation, the trio had already jumped over the fence, disappearing behind its line under confident words about complete safety. Turning around at the noise, the man did not notice anything suspicious, as if no one had been there a moment ago. Meanwhile, they were already examining the rooms, opening cabinets, and carefully checking every corner in search of at least some kind of clue. However, even the massive bookshelf, which could have hidden something important, turned out to be completely ordinary and did not hold any secrets. Likewise, the bedside table that John was rummaging through didn't give the slightest hint of hidden secrets. Suddenly, security guards entered, forcing all three of them to hide behind the kitchen counter, trying not to make a sound. Having waited out the danger, they managed to get out, and soon they were sitting under a tree trying to catch their breath. Yen couldn't shake the feeling of strangeness, because a thorough search had yielded nothing that could explain what was happening. With hope in her voice, the girl suggested that perhaps they were mistaken, and all these visits did not carry any hidden meaning. Lying on the ground, Jan replied without much enthusiasm that in that case, such regularity would not make any sense. Their respite ended abruptly when the guards discovered their presence and raised the alarm. Unable to find a better solution, Yuan awkwardly scratched the back of his head and gave a ridiculous explanation, claiming that they were simply looking for a restroom. Realizing that words wouldn't help, the girl immediately activated her ability, trying to distract the guards. It worked. Their looks instantly changed from suspicion to unconditional admiration. Maintaining a gentle smile, she told them to go to bed, hoping to buy some time to escape. Having submitted, the men obediently fell to the ground, even pointing in the right direction. To make sure of the result, the girl carefully stepped on one of them, checking whether the effect would disappear. Once she was satisfied, she turned around with a satisfied smile, clearly proud of how she had handled the situation. However, as soon as they moved away, a new group of guards noticed the movement and headed in their direction. This time, Yuan didn't wait. His gaze made it clear that he was ready to act harshly. With a sharp movement, he struck the first opponent with the blunt side of the blade, sending him to the ground. The next one received a quick punch to the chin, which he was unable to resist. The third one collapsed after a precise blow to the chest, delivered without hesitation. All three remained unconscious, and he himself calmly returned to his friends, holding a weapon in his hand. Ian looked at what was happening with confusion, not understanding what role he played among such capable allies. Looking at the lying guards, the girl quietly remarked that it would be better to remove them from sight before the situation became even more complicated. Carefully glancing around, the girl was figuring out secluded places where she could hide about 6 unconscious bodies, while Ian was already mentally trying to figure out how convenient it would be to hang all these limp guards right on the branches of the tree. Since the thought was his own and the feeling of futility was growing inside him, Yang decided without hesitation to do it himself, leaving Yuxing and Yuan to wait under the tree, where the air seemed calmer and safer. Jumping down easily, he couldn't hide his satisfied smile, because a rare feeling of being needed gently warmed him from within, filling him with unexpected calm and quiet confidence. Watching him with concern, Yuan carefully inquired if their elder brother was overburdening himself, as such small tasks could be entrusted to him and Yuxing without any extra effort. Without putting any reproach into his words, Jian explained with genuine warmth that it was important for him to feel part of a common cause, even if his contributions seemed insignificant at first glance. As soon as his words were spoken, the system noted an increase in favor from both companions, and this surprised him, because getting closer to these cultivators seemed almost too easy. After taking in the neatly secured bodies hanging from the branches like strange ornaments, they decided not to linger and continue their search while luck was still on their side. For the King of Swords, what was happening seemed strange, because continuing his vacation in such a place seemed pointless, especially when the surroundings did not reveal anything suspicious. However, John stubbornly stuck to his idea, believing that the previous search had not been thorough enough, and that now it was necessary to look for hidden passages, secret walls, and any inconspicuous details. Their intentions were suddenly threatened as the sound of Yu Qian's approaching car was too distinct to be ignored or dismissed as a coincidence. The King of Swords was the first to react to the sound, noting that he could hear the engine even from here, which meant that it was already very close, closer than they would like at that moment. As she got out of the car, the girl looked tense, and her expression was clearly displeased, as if she was already seriously suspicious of what was happening. Approaching the gate where the two men were standing, she sharply called them idiots, pointing out that they had not even noticed the disappearance of almost a dozen of their colleagues. The guards looked at each other in confusion, not understanding what was going on, as the area was quiet and there was nothing to indicate any potential problems. Without wasting any time, the company's chairwoman declared a general alarm, demanding that every corner of the house be immediately combed and those who dared to disturb the peace be found. Almost a dozen voices simultaneously confirmed the order, as if there could be no other answer, and their tones sounded hasty and ready to act. Quickly assigning zones, the guards discussed routes and divided sectors, while three young men silently watched from the balcony above. A strong anxiety gripped the girl, and she, without hiding her excitement, asked her older brother what they should do if they were discovered before they had time to leave. The King of Swords, already prepared for the clash, impatiently wondered if it was time to draw his weapon and smash this place to pieces, leaving nothing intact. Despite the request to wait, he continued to insist because the guards' footsteps were already echoing dully behind the wall, and there was less and less time left for reflection. Giving the order in a restrained tone, Jan ordered them to stay behind his back, explaining that they should first try to get by with words, but they would always have time to resort to force. A sharp blow blew the door open, and it became clear that no one was interested in peace negotiation. The search began rudely and noisily, without a hint of caution. With each step of the patent leather boots approaching, the tension grew, and panic slowly grew inside the trio, making it difficult to breathe. Entering the center of the room, the three guards froze in surprise. In front of them was something completely unusual, not fitting into their expectations. Instead of people, they saw three motionless figures, two of which resembled classical antique sculptures, while the third looked stranger, but all seemed to be carved from stone. Looking around in confusion, the head of the security group asked two of his men with disbelief whether such statues had always stood in this room or whether they had appeared here only recently. His gaze was particularly drawn to the third figure, which depicted a tense, concentrated young man whose fingers were pressed to his temples, as if he were holding something in his head that required his utmost attention. As soon as the men turned away and headed for the exit, the motionless figures instantly lost their stony stillness, regaining their living features, as if reality itself had momentarily succumbed to the deception. Understanding what exactly had happened, Yan concluded that the combination of part of the protagonist's aura and a dose of charm allowed him to form a fully fledged illusion technique capable of deceiving even the most discerning eye. Without delaying any longer than necessary, the men in formal suits left the premises, deciding that the intruders had managed to escape through the southern wall and were already out of reach. Once the need to maintain the effect disappeared, the system notified Yan that the charm skill and the protagonist's aura had been deactivated, returning his state to normal. Slowly removing his fingers from his temples, he felt the tension leave his body, as if a heavy weight had slipped from his shoulders, and the exhalation that escaped him sounded loud and almost relieved. Thoughtfully running his hand over his forehead, Yang wondered out loud why the combination of abilities formed a new technique, hoping that someone present could clarify this strange point. Watching the scene with obvious admiration, Yuan considered the presence of an illusion master among the valley's inhabitants to be a true stroke of luck, and his gaze was filled with sincere respect. Keeping the general mood up, The red-haired girl enthusiastically noted that the valley finally had someone they could rely on, whose reliability was felt even in such dangerous situations. Meanwhile, security continued to comb the area, exchanging short messages through headphones and reporting which areas had already been checked and which remained unattended. Having gathered her subordinates, Yu Qian listened to their reports with cold concentration, and she was especially interested in the report about the intruders in the fourth section who had managed to escape. What she heard did not bring her satisfaction, and a sharp feeling of persecution seemed to awaken inside her, forcing her to decide to personally check every suspicious area. Stopping at an almost invisible door, she asked the nearby guards if they had checked this room, without taking her gaze off the inconspicuous surface. Turning around abruptly, the chairwoman reminded one of them that she had seen men leaving the place seconds after entering without paying due attention to the inspection. Realizing that the next test could be fatal, the three young men inside the room froze, barely containing the growing horror from the knowledge that she was about to enter. With difficulty maintaining their composure, Yu Xing and Yang understood that her senses were too developed, and even the most accurate illusion might prove insufficient against such attentiveness. In contrast, the King of Swords looked calm, and a slight smile flickered across his face, as if he was waiting for the right moment to finally use force. The woman confidently reached out and touched the black door handle, and the movement seemed so decisive that it left little hope for chance. A gentle push set the mechanism in motion, and the door opened just a few centimeters, but even that was enough to send a wave of panic through the air. An unexpected ringing caused her to be distracted, and taking her phone out of her pocket, she saw a photo of Yu Wanning on the screen, whose name immediately caught her attention. The short-haired woman looked at the screen with irritation, trying to understand the reason for the call, since the moment for a conversation seemed extremely inappropriate. Still holding the handle, which now served as a kind of support, the lady nevertheless accepted the challenge, without completely tearing herself away from what was happening around her. The realization of the delay brought relief, and those standing on the other side of the door exhaled almost simultaneously, feeling the tension ease for a moment. Addressing Yu Wanning as Aunt Ning, she asked with noticeable anxiety in her voice why she decided to call now, not hiding her inner tension. From the other side came a short, cold answer that the news had already been seen, and the woman added that she was in the city, sitting at a table on the street near a cafe. Taking a leisurely drag on her pipe, Yu Wanning continued the conversation, reminding with cold confidence that Yu Xing was a disciple of the indestructible valley, and this fact should not be left without due respect. With a noticeably increased irritation, she asked directly how it was that the red-haired girl had agreed to work for Yu Qian's company, as if the very thought of it seemed unacceptable to her. Under the pressure of these words, the chairwoman felt sweat appear on her forehead, and trying to maintain confidence, she began to hastily search for an excuse for what was happening. In an attempt to soften the situation, she referred to the assassination attempt on their father, hoping that such an explanation would evoke at least some understanding and reduce the tension. Forcing a plaintive tone into her voice, the girl added that the man had been seriously injured, as if that could justify her decisions and actions. However, what he heard did not evoke a drop of sympathy, and a cold voice reminded him that Yu Tiangen's condition did not give him the right to turn his student into a weak-willed executor of other people's orders. At this moment, it dawned on Yu Qian that her younger sister had already managed to convey the situation to the valley's leader, and this realization sent a painful pang through her. Slightly narrowing her eyes, Yu Wanning continued speaking, asking a question that didn't require an answer, but clearly led to the idea of Yu Xing's true meaning. There was silence in response, because even with all her harshness, the short-haired lady could not immediately find the words that could withstand this onslaught. With difficulty, she pulled herself together, took a deep breath, and admitted that she knew about Yu Xing's status as Yu Wanning's personal disciple, trying to sound as confident as possible. Without releasing the pressure, the voice on the other end of the line became even colder, and it asked what status a person in such a position had, requiring a precise answer. The girl hesitated, feeling her confidence slipping away, and it was becoming increasingly difficult to maintain her former calm in the face of a more powerful woman. Without giving her a chance to evade, the owner of the valley demanded that the status of the headman's disciple be immediately announced, emphasizing the importance of every word. With a heavy sigh, the chairwoman finally admitted that Yu Xing stood above the rest and was not inferior to anyone, in fact, occupying the highest position among them. Hearing this, the woman on the other side of the line chuckled softly, clearly satisfied that she had achieved the desired recognition without any extra effort. After reminding her of her presence in the city, Yu Wanning expressed her desire to spend time with the student, making it clear that she should be released without further hindrance. After these words, the connection was cut off, and Yu Qian, left in silence, pressed her lips together, feeling an unpleasant aftertaste from the conversation. Looking gloomily at the phone screen, she wondered if she had come here solely for the red-haired girl, or if there was something more behind it. Having mentally thrown a few harsh words at her younger sister and her mother, she nevertheless noted that she was surprisingly lucky despite the circumstances. Meanwhile, Yu Wanning continued smoking her pipe with a satisfied expression, noting to herself that Yang was doing an excellent job of fulfilling the role assigned to him. Even before this call, Yang had managed to send his mentor a message in which he shared an anxious premonition about Yu Qian and warned that in case of danger, he would send an empty signal. Rising from the table with a slight, satisfied smile, the mentor slowly considered the possible consequences of the conversation and how it would influence future decisions. She glanced around the street and allowed herself a short pause, as she had a whole day ahead of her, and she needed to decide how to fill this time in an unfamiliar but curious city. Having turned her attention to other tasks, the chairwoman calmly ordered the search to continue without her participation, leaving her subordinates to deal with the situation on their own. The three young men stood motionless, holding their breath, listening to the gradually fading footsteps and trying to figure out what her next move would be. Confusion didn't leave Yuxing, and she tried to formulate a plan of action on the fly, thinking over possible steps while the situation was temporarily under control. Carefully reviewing what he had heard, Yang noted the anxious notes in Yu Qian's voice that had sounded during the conversation with their mentor, and seemed to him to be no coincidence. Scratching the back of his head, he continued his thoughts, considering that the girl did not leave the villa immediately, although it seemed that she had every reason to do so. From these observations, the conclusion gradually emerged that there was someone truly significant inside, since she decided to stay despite the possible risks. With obvious surprise, the King of Swords turned to the elder, inquiring how he had been able to predict the call of his mentor at precisely the right moment. Taking on a deliberately serious look, Yang began to explain, assuring that it was all about Yu Qian's special sensitivity, like that of a cat princess, which allowed her to feel more than usual. Crossing his arms with noticeable smugness, he added that, based on these conclusions, he simply asked the mentor to call and distract the short-haired girl. Looking at him with admiration, the red-haired girl did not hide her respect, perceiving what was said as an expression of a well-thought-out strategy and confidence. After these words, the goodwill and level of trust on the part of both companions increased noticeably, reflecting their attitude towards Jan's actions. Hearing praise addressed to him, where he was called brave and resourceful, he felt how self-satisfaction quickly grew, filling his thoughts with a pleasant feeling of importance. However, his attention soon returned to the conversation, and he wondered if the teacher might have said something more, judging by Yu Qian's reaction. Having shared his suspicions, he pointed out the girl's high status and noted her nervous behavior, linking this to possible hidden pressure. In a low voice, the Sword King added that Yan did not yet fully understand how influential Yu Wanning was and what opportunities lay behind it. Yu Hing placed her hands on her hips and supported this hint with a slight grin, as if she knew much more about her mentor's abilities. Turning to the elder, she leaned in conspiratorially, about to share a story about Yu Wanning that could explain a lot. Listening intently, Yuan asked what they should do next, whether they should just wait for elder sister Yu Xing to leave this place. Suddenly, out of nowhere, a male voice sounded, calmly informing that the wait would be long, since the owner spent several hours at a time in the office. Turning sharply toward the sound, Yuan noted with surprise that even his sensitivity did not allow him to notice the presence of a stranger in the room in advance. Although the figure remained hidden, the King of Swords detected a familiar aura, which made it clear that he had encountered the source of the voice before. Without hiding any longer, a man with long hair tied in a ponytail appeared in front of them, and it became clear that the person standing in front of them was the company's secretary. Slowly straightening up, the collected man assumed a calm stance, allowing the invisible veil to dissipate around him to finally become visible to everyone present in the room. Feeling the familiar vibrations, the King of Swords noticeably relaxed, realizing that the artifact was not the issue at all, meaning his own skills remained unchanged and were not affected. Recognizing the figure in front of her, the red-haired girl perked up and greeted the man with genuine joy, not hiding her relief that a familiar person was standing in front of them. Only Yan remained confused, not understanding what was happening, and quietly asked Yu Xing who this person was and how she knew him. After carefully examining the man of average build, she calmly explained that the man in front of them was Secretary Yu Qian, adding that he had always treated her kindly and without hidden intentions. Quickly putting the facts together, the elder realized that this was the man who had been following him and the King of Swords before, but since he hadn't given them up then, it meant he was unlikely to do so now. With his hands clasped behind his back, Secretary Rong stated in a stern tone that they had entered the premises illegally and must leave the premises immediately without causing any unnecessary problems. Raising his voice, he added that if Yu Qian found them here, the consequences would be extremely severe, and his words sounded more than just a warning. Listening awkwardly to the space, Yu Xing noticed that the office was too quiet and admitted that she did not feel the presence of her sister's aura. Trying again, the King of Swords concentrated and placed his fingers to his temple, after which he chuckled briefly, as if confirming the strangeness of what was happening. Calmly continuing his thought, he noted that although the lady had clearly entered the office, her presence there was not felt, as if she had disappeared from normal perception. Thinking about this, John felt uneasy, because he himself could not sense the aura and was forced to rely only on logical conclusions from what he heard. Clenching his fist, he frowned and confidently stated that it was the office that was causing suspicion, since the aura could be felt everywhere except for it, suggesting that they searched the premises after the girl left. Reacting sharply, the long-haired man raised his voice, calling this plan extremely foolish. And in his words, one could sense not only anger, but also an attempt to protect them from harm. Turning to Yan, the secretary insistently repeated that he and his companions should leave immediately, without waiting for the situation to worsen. Without giving in to the pressure, the young man noted with a slight grin that given Rong's secrecy, he was here for the same reason as they were. Meanwhile, the chairwoman's red car was leaving the area, and the guards' gazes silently followed its movement along the road. Picking up speed, the car rushed forward so rapidly as if it reflected the inner state of the person behind the wheel. Every movement of her face was filled with suppressed anger, and even the slightest changes in expression betrayed irritation and tension. Watching from the window, the King of Swords followed her departure closely, not missing a single detail of what was happening. Turning to the others, he noted that she appeared in the office suddenly and just as suddenly left the house, as if leaving them something to think about. Looking intently at the phone screen, Jen clarified that exactly 1 hour and 36 minutes had passed between these events. Frowning, he resolutely suggested that they go into the office and conduct a thorough search while the opportunity arose. Still irritated, Secretary Rong turned to them reproachfully, calling them children who stubbornly ignored any warnings. With a pleading look in her eyes, the girl turned to her uncle, stubbornly insisting that she had to find her mother, and no obstacles would force her to give up this search. Without backing down, she continued to persuade him, asking him at least not to interfere with her if he did not intend to reveal their plan and interfere with what was happening. Secretary Rong let out a heavy sigh and clutched his head, clearly exhausted, but still agreed to help, not wanting to leave the three enthusiastic young people without support. Once in the office, everyone went about their business, some checking cabinets, some studying laptops, and only the long-haired man stood to the side watching what was happening. Taking his eyes off the screen, Ian asked if he had been here before, since his invisibility skill gave him that ability. The only response was a short proverb hinting at the need for caution in matters where the cost of a mistake could be too high. At the same time, there was a strange regret in his expression, the nature of which was difficult to immediately understand, as if he had missed something important. It soon became clear that the reason lay in the recently acquired cloak, which he had not yet had time to use as it should have. Turning around with slight resentment, he added that the cloak did not work on everyone, citing Yan as an example, whose thoughts, in his opinion, were too suspicious. Running his hand along the wall, Wen came across a barely noticeable circle that was not distinguished by relief and almost merged with the surface. Hidden behind a uniform shade, this element became almost invisible and could only be detected by an accidental touch. Turning around, he called the elder and reported that he had found something similar to a mechanism hidden right in the wall. Calling Yu Xing over, Yang suggested that she be the first to test the button he had found, and she agreed without hesitation. Coming closer, the girl carefully touched the center of the circle, pressing on it with caution and attention. At that very moment, the space seemed to tremble, and a light stream of air touched her face, causing her to freeze in surprise. A portal opened in front of her, the energy of which swirled in a vortex where just a moment ago, there had been an unnoticeable button. Observing the result, Jan felt a clear sense of satisfaction, realizing that his guess about the mechanism's connection with kinship had been correct. Without thinking, Rong followed the girl, like the others. either out of curiosity or a desire to ensure her safety. Putting a finger to his lips, Ian quietly warned his companions to be careful and to conceal their auras in the place where they were going. Walking behind, he carefully watched Rong, thinking that this man had always been considered a loyal protector of the Yu family. However, what was happening clearly contradicted this image, and his help seemed unexpected, which could not go unnoticed. After passing through the portal, the four of them found themselves in a new room that was completely different from their previous home. The sudden sight made the girl in front stop, and her confidence instantly turned to confusion. The reason was that her father was on the floor below, looking absolutely healthy and calmly watching television. It was impossible to tell from his appearance that he had recently been wounded, because there was not the slightest trace of injury on his body. Even Yuan couldn't immediately accept what he saw, and for a moment he allowed the thought that it might be a twin brother in front of them. Comfortably seated on the sofa, the man in the expensive suit lazily held his phone and was completely immersed in what was happening on the screen. Realizing the impossibility of such a coincidence, the girl confusedly admitted that she did not understand what was happening and could not find an explanation. Turning to Jun as a last resort, she asked hopefully what all this could mean and how they should proceed next. It was hard to believe that the man was supporting her, because even he couldn't hide his shock, and his gaze showed confusion and fear at what he was seeing, as if what was happening was knocking the ground out from under his feet. The sudden confusion on his face completely shattered the girl's confidence, because she was used to seeing stability in him, and such a reaction was too much for her. Having collected himself, he again put on his mask of calm and ordered all three to leave immediately, explaining that the representatives of the Cat clan were extremely sensitive and would not be able to fail to notice such an obvious presence. However, inside him the anxiety only grew, because he too was sure that the head of the family was in serious condition and could not accept what he saw. Hearing a slight movement above, the man decided that it was Yu Qian again, returning for something she had forgotten, unaware of the real reason for the noise. As soon as his voice sounded, fear gripped their bodies, and without saying a word, everyone rushed to the portal, trying to leave the dangerous place as quickly as possible. Returning back, they saw the familiar picture of the estate, where nothing betrayed what had happened, as if everything had remained unchanged. Containing her anxiety, the red-haired girl turned sharply to the man, demanding an explanation and not hiding the tension in her voice. Unwilling to tolerate the uncertainty any longer, she asked him directly whose side he was on, as his actions seemed contradictory and confusing to her. Keeping her calm, Rong quietly replied that some knowledge was better left unacquired, because the less she knew, the higher her chances of staying safe. The irritation grew, and the girl continued to bombard him with questions, trying to find out if he knew anything about her mother and why he was in this house. Closing his eyes for a moment, he admitted that he had only fragmentary information that did not allow him to draw precise conclusions about what was happening. Continuing to speak, the man added that he would pretend that nothing had happened and strongly advised her to return to the valley as soon as possible. He explained with conviction that the situation within the family had become too complicated, and if she remained involved, the consequences could be dangerous for her. The words came out unexpectedly, and the girl was momentarily taken aback, not being prepared to hear such a direct warning. A sudden call interrupted the conversation, and the man asked to wait a little while he answered the call. Ms. Tang's name appeared on the screen, immediately adding a new sense of urgency to the conversation. After exchanging a few words, he ended the conversation with a promise to leave immediately on the mission. Watching him closely, the girl tried to catch in his facial expression even a hint of the truth that was eluding her. Leaning slightly, he explained that he had been called to discuss business and needed to leave without delay. With a soft nostalgia in his voice, he added that he hadn't expected to see Yu Xing again, as if it had come as a surprise to him. Noticing her confusion, he quietly said that her eyes reminded him of her mother's eyes, and there was something personal in these words. Turning his gaze to Ian, he mentioned that he had heard the girl call him Big Brother, as if testing their connection. With a slight smile, the secretary asked her to take care of her and look after her, handing over the responsibility without further ado. Confirming his readiness, Ian gently held the girl back, not allowing her to rush after him, as if he had already taken on this role. He confidently declared that he would be there and would not leave her without support, putting calm determination into his words. There was a silence in response, in which the man carefully assessed him, as if trying to understand how much he could trust this promise. Having made sure of his own, Zhang smiled faintly and said that he could go, since everything had been said. The next moment his figure disappeared, leaving behind only emptiness, and the three young people silently looked at where he stood. With a feeling of satisfaction, Ian turned to the girl and his gaze showed soft confidence. He warmly assured her that he would be there and support any decision she made, trying to give her back the feeling of support. This support was important to her, and she accepted it, although she was not freed from her inner anxiety. The girl crossed her arms and tried to regain her balance, collecting her thoughts and suppressing her confusion. Soon her gaze became firmer, and she confidently declared that she would go to the hospital, leaving no room for objection. By the time Secretary Rong arrived to meet with Madame Tang, evening was already giving way to night, slowly enveloping the city in silence. The secretary politely stepped over the threshold, quietly closed the door behind him, and greeted both women with restraint, trying not to reveal the tension that was gradually building up inside. With a slight smile and a hidden subtext, the adult woman with short hair asked how long he had served the Yu family, and her tone suggested a check rather than simple interest. Maintaining impeccable politeness, he replied that he had been serving the young lady for so long that he no longer kept track of time, and that he had been working for the company for many years without interruption. Pleased with what she heard, Yu Qian calmly turned to her mother and explained that happy people do not count the days because only those who suffer cling to dates. Frowning, the secretary carefully examined the room, trying to catch hidden hints and understand what exactly was expected of him that evening. Taking a leisurely sip of tea, Mrs. Tang said that the purpose this time was special, and her words made it clear what kind of service he was engaged in. Becoming more serious, she looked at him intently and asked if she could trust him, emphasizing the importance of the upcoming task. Without a moment's hesitation, he calmly replied that he had never failed an assignment, and there was firm confidence in his voice. While looking through the documents, Yu Qian quietly said the target's name, and it turned out to be Murong Tianlang. When the folder was in his hands, his gaze caught on the photograph, and the resemblance was so frightening that he froze for a moment. Meanwhile, the hospital towered over the street, and as evening approached, its windows glowed with a soft light, creating the feeling of a living organism. Trying not to attract attention, the three young men moved quickly through the corridors, choosing less conspicuous routes. As they moved deeper, they felt increasing tension because the required chamber was far away, and the journey seemed too long. Walking ahead, the King of Swords carefully examined the area, trying to notice possible danger in advance and avoid encounters with the staff. Having reached the right place, the girl pressed her palms to the glass, as if she was afraid of losing what she would see inside. Behind the transparent barrier lay her father, surrounded by many tubes and devices maintaining his condition. His pallor seemed frightening, and the mask on his face only increased the feeling of fragility and anxiety. With difficulty containing her emotions, Yuxing tried to understand what had happened and why he was in such a state. Standing nearby, Jan carefully asked if her father had a twin brother, remembering what he had seen earlier. Looking up at him, she quietly replied that she had never heard of such a thing, and there was confusion in her voice. Assessing the situation, Yuan noted that it was impossible to act openly here, since the place was not protected and required caution. Hearing the approaching footsteps, they realized that they couldn't use their abilities, and there was no time left to think. Making a quick decision, the King of Swords ordered a retreat, and the trio disappeared into the long corridors. The very next day, events moved to another location, where the opponents of the Yu Qin company were hiding. Gathered around a glass table, they tried to make sense of what they had seen and develop a plan of action. The King of Swords spoke first, noting that the sick man looked convincing, but the other man in the secret place was far more suspicious. From his words, the conclusion was that the double was closely connected with Yu Qian, and this changed the whole picture of what was happening. Suddenly, Yang abruptly said Huan Xilan's name, as if he had suddenly remembered an important detail. Wen turned to him in surprise and asked who he was talking about, not understanding where the name came from. With obvious bewilderment, Yan asked if he hadn't heard anything about such a person, since they were talking about a rather well-known figure. Explaining the idea, he spoke about a man who uses doubles as a distraction, turning them into bait for enemies. Thinking over what he had heard, Yuan admitted that a similar scheme could well have been implemented in their situation. Turning to the girl, John asked if she could determine by family ties which of the men was her real father. Yuan intervened, reminding her that she had left the house too early and was unlikely to have retained an accurate sense of his aura. Continuing, he confidently added that he himself knew Yu Tiangang better and was able to give a more accurate assessment. With fury in her voice, the girl sharply objected, assuring that she would recognize her father under any circumstances, even if only dust remained of him, and there was a painful certainty in her words. Without hiding her determination, she recalled her methods, adding that ultimately she wanted to personally end her father's life, so she had no right to make a mistake in her choice. She felt the man in the hospital seemed closer to the truth, and it wasn't just his appearance, but a subtle sense of aura that she couldn't ignore. At the same time, The girl admitted that the man in the secret place also had a similar aura, and this similarity seemed too accurate to be accidental. With his arms crossed, Ian looked at her carefully, trying to grasp the train of her thoughts and understand what conclusions she was leading to. The patient's condition created additional complexity, as the numerous instruments in the mask made his presence felt vague and elusive. It was obvious that Yuxing needed to get closer to finally make sure and dispel the doubts that were bothering him. The previous evening, the conversation at the Yu family home had dragged on, turning into a tense discussion where every word carried weight. Those present were well aware that the dossier handed over to the secretary concerned him personally, and this made the situation especially dangerous. With a hint of pressure, Yu Qian handed over the documents, explaining that the agreement was beneficial to both parties, making it clear that refusal would result in the need to kill himself. Understanding the gravity of the moment, the older woman invited Tianlang to sit down and have some tea, as if to steer the conversation in a more relaxed direction. Developing the idea, she noted that if demons and people are able to coexist, then conflicts between similar creatures lose their meaning. Containing his inner tension, the man tried to understand the motives behind the proposal, since the Yu family usually acted differently and did not offer compromises. Continuing to speak, she emphasized that over 20 years of work, he had become part of their circle, and the differences between clans no longer had the same significance. With a gentle smile, she added that she saw his contribution and appreciated the benefit he brought, despite unknown motives. Taking the cup carefully, Rong asked for time to think, realizing how precarious his position was. However, Ms. Tan insisted on an immediate response, not allowing the decision to be delayed and demanding frankness. The dryness in his mouth betrayed his agitation, and he drained the cup in one gulp, as if trying to regain control of himself. Having put it down with a dull sound, the man began to talk about how the Wolf clan had managed to build its own stable system after the transformation. Comparing forces, he noted that despite its service, the company of the Cat clan is inferior in independence and needs strengthening. Developing the proposal, the secretary expressed the idea of a temporary union, realizing that such a decision could meet with resistance due to the issue of profit. To his surprise, Ms. Tan agreed, showing a willingness to consider this option as the most reasonable one. Seeing that the conversation was moving towards agreement, Yu Qian intervened, shifting attention to another issue. She seriously reported a recent break-in at the villa and demanded that security be strengthened around it. Maintaining composure, the man pretended not to understand what place was being talked about, although he himself had recently been there, hidden from view. Taking out her phone, the girl calmly promised the man to send the exact address of the house he needed, doing so confidently and without unnecessary hesitation, as if she had been prepared for such a request in advance. Maintaining his composure, he continued to ask clarifying questions, pretending to know nothing about the villa, and inquired with interest whether it was open to outsiders, receiving a negative answer and detecting a hidden anxiety. With a slight smile, Madame added that she trusted him as a family member and therefore expected him to take full responsibility, putting into these words not only a request, but also a barely perceptible pressure. Nodding, the man hastened to assure Yu Qian that he would immediately begin the task, trying to sound convincing and not reveal his inner tension. Left in thought, the chairwoman involuntarily returned to thoughts of the villa, realizing that contact with her younger sister was still absent, and making an alarming conclusion about her involvement. Having politely bid farewell to those present, Secretary Rong noted that the discussion was over and carefully made it clear that it was time for him to leave without staying longer than necessary. As he left the office, he felt very tired, because the conversation had turned out to be much more dangerous than it seemed, and the thought of the recent threat still hadn't left him. Behind him, he could feel the heavy gaze of the younger mistress, in which tension and hidden anger could be read, as if she continued to watch his every move. As he walked down the corridor, he noticed a figure in a business suit walking confidently towards him, which looked like a normal chance encounter. Smiling reservedly, the man with neatly styled hair was the first to greet, creating an impression of ease and businesslike calm. Responding in kind, Rong addressed him warmly as Uncle Xian, maintaining the usual tone of communication and not arousing unnecessary suspicion. Having limited themselves to a short greeting, they parted without continuing the conversation, as if their meeting had had no significance. Having moved a sufficient distance away, the secretary folded 2 fingers at his chest, and a thin vortex of blue energy swirled around them, hinting at the action that was about to take place. To an observer with special abilities, it would be obvious that there was a white mark on Shan's back, resembling a human silhouette. Maintaining his concentration, Rong turned around carefully, continuing his impact, trying not to attract attention and act discreetly. Under the influence of energy, the mark began to gradually disappear as if dissolving into thin air, losing its shape and clarity. Unaware of what was happening, Xian calmly walked away down the corridor without showing the slightest sign of anxiety. In the darkness near the building, a car was already parked, its headlights illuminating the space, creating the feeling of an imminent departure. Speaking through a hidden earpiece, the man with his hair tied up said that Wrong Wei was already aware of the disclosure, speaking in a subdued tone. Continuing the conversation, he suggested not to rush to conclusions and observe how events unfold, recalling his long-standing devotion to the company. Through the static, a voice could be heard mentioning the missing fragment, which sounded alarming and hinted at more serious circumstances. Continuing the conversation while driving, the man turned his head slightly to the side and asked if he was referring to the same fragment, since the Lin Mao clan, as he remembered, also kept a similar artifact. A calm voice in the earpiece, without unnecessary emotion, explained that the most important thing now was to find the connection between the strangers in the villa and the fragment itself, without missing a single detail. Aware of the growing tension around the villa, the driver's frown deepened, knowing that security had to be tightened to the limit to ensure that not a single extra shadow came close. Unable to find a logical explanation for what was happening, he suddenly wondered why the old story about the fragment had surfaced now, and for a moment he fell out of reality. The stopped car quickly created a dense line behind him, and irritated voices began to push him to action, not allowing him to continue his thoughts calmly. Ignoring the noise around him, he delved deeper into his thoughts, trying to figure out what reasons could have caused Yu Tiangan to keep Yu Xing in the city, and whether it was related to the fragments. Anxiety was growing inside because the girl was a rare hybrid of a dog and a cat, and the girl's real father, as was known, had not been injured, and the picture did not add up. Meanwhile, the tension behind them was growing. People were no longer hiding their discontent, especially the motorcyclists, who were bothered by every second of waiting. Only after a moment did he finally return to reality, listen to the noise, and smoothly move the car forward, as if breaking away from his own thoughts. Feeling the situation spiraling out of control, the driver gripped the steering wheel tighter, and the most gloomy and disturbing thoughts began to form in his mind. Since early morning, the two young people had already settled into the Westin Hotel, occupying the spacious presidential suite, where the atmosphere seemed tense with anticipation. The red-haired girl chatted casually with the King of Swords, and their gazes were filled with anticipation, as if they were waiting for someone to appear soon. Suddenly, the door swung open and the teacher walked in with Yan, and this appearance immediately caused genuine surprise among everyone in the room. Gently supporting her by the arm, Jan led the woman forward, not hiding his delight that she had personally decided to visit them and pay attention to what was happening. Hastily explaining his behavior, he referred to Yu Wanning's words, assuring that until the very end, he considered her arrival merely a diversionary maneuver. Without any unnecessary emotion, the woman sank down onto the sofa, and her tired look indicated that her strength was running out, despite her outward calm. Slowly extending her hand forward, she made a gesture as if she expected to receive something prepared in advance and did not need an explanation. Without wasting a second, the King of Swords placed a cigarette in her palm and immediately brought a lighter, demonstrating his usual coordination. Watching the valley's inhabitants line up in front of her, the elder brother felt uneasy as he felt his efforts were lacking. In a calm voice, Yu Wanning explained her visit by saying that she was attending a new collection show, and this unexpectedly reminded her of the company's business. Almost instantly, he was behind her and spoke softly, assuring her that the boss shouldn't waste time on such tasks, since everything had to be delivered. Wanting to impress, he began to massage her, accompanying his movements with flattering words and hoping to show his devotion in this way. The woman answered wearily, noting that modern designs were becoming too abstract, and so she had to choose everything personally. Without missing a beat, she noted the awkwardness of his movements and calmly added that he should learn from his second younger sister, who was doing better. Hearing this, the young man was confused, because for him, an expensive, well-known company seemed like the pinnacle of quality, while in the eyes of his boss, it looked almost useless. Taking a leisurely inhale, the woman bowed her head slightly and gently beckoned the student closer, inviting her to come and talk privately in a calm setting. With a slight smile, the girl immediately responded to the call. Without a shadow of doubt and completely trusting her mentor, she approached, maintaining an open and sincere gaze. Clutching his head in confusion, Yan tried to calculate his boss's income, since her luxurious habits did not at all correspond to the fact that she could delay payments. Trying to find a logical explanation, he recalled how the system had first described Yuan as an ordinary guy with no experience, and then suddenly removed that description as if correcting a mistake. Already carried away by his fantasies, he mentally calculated what salary and generous bonuses he could receive working under the supervision of such a wealthy woman. Meanwhile, the woman turned her attention to Yu Xing and began asking her about recent events, mentioning that she had seen a news report where her name appeared. Frowning slightly, she added that even the most insignificant details should not be overlooked, because it is in the little things that the true reason for what is happening may be hidden. Having collected her thoughts, the girl tried to speak honestly and without concealment, telling in detail what had happened to her over the past few days. Without being distracted from what was happening, Yan stared intently at the silent Sword King, not understanding why he remained on the sidelines and did not join in the conversation. From his tense face and the barely noticeable trembling in his body, it was clear that the fencer was deeply worried about something, although he tried to hide it. With difficulty, he pulled himself together and quietly tried to intervene in the conversation, as if overcoming internal resistance and uncertainty in his own words. However, having lost his usual insolence, he was unable to continue and only clenched his hands, after which he fell silent, as if afraid of saying too much. Observing his behavior, one could draw the obvious conclusion that the young man was afraid of the teacher and therefore did not dare to speak freely. To everyone's surprise, the once self-confident hero looked like a confused child, and it was hard to believe that his behavior had changed so much. Going over the possible reasons, the older brother was inclined to think that he was afraid of the consequences in the form of cuts in payments, and this was what constrained him the most. At this time, the girl continued to talk about her work, mentioning that her duties were limited to making coffee and printing documents, which clearly weighed on her. Holding back her irritation, the boss noticed the unfairness of this attitude, but advised her to adopt her older brother's persistence. Hearing this, Jan felt a surge of energy inside and a sense of hope that his efforts would finally be noticed and appreciated. Carefully taking the girl's hand in her own, Yu Wanning showed gentleness and began to comfort the fifth younger sister, showing genuine concern. Continuing to speak warm words, she noted her efforts and expressed concern, noting that due to the workload, she had noticeably lost weight. Trying to support the student, the woman assured her that while she was nearby, she would not have to deal with tedious trifles and could concentrate on other things. Hearing this, the girl noticeably perked up and said with gratitude that her mentor was her best support. Almost unnoticed by those around her, a thin blue thread of energy flashed between the woman's fingers, seeming to dissolve upon touching the student. Almost immediately, a change became noticeable, as the girl suddenly began to speak more openly and admitted that her father had not actually been injured. Seeing the result with a slight sense of satisfaction, Yu Wanning gently suggested that they continue sharing what was hidden deeper within. Trying not to give himself away, Ian still caught a subtle change in the air and noticed how the teacher discreetly cast a spell on her younger sister without attracting the attention of those around her. However, there was almost no time left to think because the system interface flashed right before my eyes again, abruptly drawing my attention to itself. In the first window of the dossier, almost nothing had changed, but the most striking reminder was that he still had no acquaintance points with his boss. What struck him even more was the second window, which he stated without further explanation that the boss knew absolutely everything. This formulation seemed too vague, and he could not understand what exactly was hidden behind such a strange statement. Trying to somehow explain what he saw, he connected this line with the behavior of the Sword King, who barely dared to breathe next to his mentor. At the same time, the effect of the spell seemed unusual, because despite the increased frankness, Yu Xing's speech remained scattered and in places lost coherence. When the conversation turned to her father, Yu Wanning's gaze changed noticeably, and a hidden aggression was clearly visible in it. Turning to the young man, who had managed to notice what was happening, she quietly pressed her finger to her lips, making it clear that he should remain silent. In that brief moment, their gazes met, and the boy's confused, frightened eyes met the cold confidence of his boss. Not wanting to go against the unspoken order, Ian quickly looked away, trying not to draw any more attention to himself. The thought that the teacher had noticed his observation haunted him and made him feel extremely insecure. It was then that he realized that the line about knowing everything was referring to her seeing his reaction to the spell. To avoid dwelling on this feeling, he deliberately switched his attention to the system windows, trying to distract himself. What particularly worried him was that after a whole month of work, his acquaintance rate with his boss had barely reached a negligible percentage. Watching her closely, he began to understand that in this sense, the teacher really did remain almost unattainable. With a slight tension in his face, he tried to imagine how the situation would change if he managed to get closer to her and earn her favor. Gradually carried away by fantasies, he painted pictures in his head of his own power, reaching thoughts about the ability to change even the fate of the world. Meanwhile, Yu Wanning calmly stated that the question of the girl's real father would be resolved through her, without any unnecessary arguments. Hearing this, the red-haired girl smiled warmly and finally decided to mention her mother, adding new details. Frowning slightly, the woman remarked that, knowing her father's character, he would probably make a fuss, so it was worth listening to him first. Wanting to end the conversation on a lighter note, the mentor, with cold confidence, promised to deal with the man if he became rude. With obvious relief, the girl immediately agreed to this decision, relying entirely on the strength and authority of her mentor. At this moment, the Sword King finally gathered the courage to draw attention to himself and break the silence. With a look of noticeable alarm on his face, he began to say that he could not bear it any longer, and it was obvious that something was seriously bothering him. Almost shouting, the boy hurriedly said that if he didn't say it now, he would never dare to voice his thoughts again. With obvious irritation on her face, the tired lady abruptly cut off his flow of words and demanded that he speak faster without wasting her time. With difficulty containing himself, he admitted that he was literally drawn to the sword, and his hands were already itching with the desire to start training again. Without changing her calm tone, Yu Wanning briefly ordered him to sit down, leaving no room for objections. Without a second's hesitation, the young man obediently plopped down next to her, as if awaiting further instructions. Casting a stern glance at him from under her brows, she coldly asked if Yuen had started training yet. Instead of a direct answer, he evaded and asked a counter-question, clarifying who would be responsible for any possible regression. Gradually increasing the pressure, he began to play on pity, comparing the teacher's attitude towards Yu Xing and towards himself. Unable to bear the tension, the fencer fell to his knees with tears in his eyes, begging to be allowed to train and not deprive him of his chance. Watching what was happening, the older brother couldn't help but wonder where the hero's former confidence and powerful aura had gone. Looking down at the young man, Yu Wanning reminded him of the first point in the association's management plan, which strictly prohibited the use of supernatural powers. The guy, dejected, fell silent and stared at the floor, accepting the fact that the rules were the same for everyone, without exception. Softening a little, she added that if her assumptions were correct, he would soon have a chance to show off his skills, and then he could have some fun. Hearing this, he instantly perked up and began bombarding her with questions, trying to find out when exactly this moment would come. This haste visibly irritated the woman, and she coldly warned him that excessive curiosity could cost him his life. Not to be left out, Yu Xing also showed interest and eagerly asked what exactly the teacher meant. Instead of explaining, she simply smiled mysteriously, promising that everything would soon become obvious without further ado. With a slight grace, Yu Wanning rose from the sofa and declared that she had some business to attend to, and the hotel staff would take care of it. Hastily agreeing, John supported her decision and expressed his readiness to say goodbye, trying to hide his inner tension. Without a moment's hesitation, the woman suddenly took off and within a second had soared upward, disappearing without a trace. Yan's surprise was genuine, as he remembered the ban on using powers in the human world. In fact, she headed straight to Yuja's villa, determined to fulfill her promise and deal with Yu Xing's father right away. Now there was a reinforced security guard at the gate, where 6 people in dark glasses and formal suits closely monitored the territory. Suddenly, their eyes widened in shock, as if something beyond their normal understanding had happened. The reason was obvious, because the strong guards were knocked down one after another by an invisible force, not even giving them a chance to stand. Yu Wanning confidently approached the gate, her heels stamping, every sound echoing in the air with tension, as if warning of an imminent invasion. Without slowing down, she walked through the lying bodies of the guards and headed straight for the entrance, not paying attention to the consequences of her appearance. Quickly getting her bearings, the valley leader found the button in Chen's office and pressed it without hesitation, as if she already knew where to look. Strangely, under her touch, the panel flashed a bright red light, something that had never happened before when Yu can use this button. A whirlwind of scarlet energy erupted from the tip of her finger, its power seemingly blinding, filling the space with an alarming hum. Unlike the others who moved silently through the portals, she burst in with deafening explosions, breaking the usual silence. Not expecting this, the man in the chair was caught off guard and did not even have time to understand what was happening. Looking around in confusion, he asked out loud what had happened and why the space around him suddenly began to tremble. Trying to gain control, he raised 2 fingers and attempted to cast a spell aimed at restoring the damaged space. However, instead of the desired effect, everything only got worse, and the walls began to collapse even faster, crumbling around them. Having lost his support of calm, the man was forced to rise from his chair, trying to stay on his feet amidst the growing chaos. Looking around at the destruction and bewilderment, he tried to understand the source of what was happening, but the answer was already rapidly approaching. With each step, the invisible threat became more palpable, filling the space with the feeling of an impending nightmare. Standing with his back to what was happening, he did not see how the teacher confidently approached him without slowing down. As soon as he heard his name, he immediately realized who was standing behind him, and his face instantly distorted with horror. Turning slowly, he felt sweat break out on his skin, and with a trembling voice called her his aunt. Without showing any warmth, she coldly asked him if he was enjoying hiding like a hunted animal. The power you wanting release caused clouds of gray dust to rise above the forest, creating a gloomy curtain. The little creatures that lived in the house began to rush about in irritation, having lost their usual shelter and expressing discontent. Not tolerating any unnecessary noise, she threatened them with her heel, instantly stopping any signs of discontent. Looking at her warily, the man tried to understand what had brought her here and what to expect next. With her hands on her hips, she sternly stated that she had come to the city after hearing rumors of his imminent death. With a cold smile, she added that she was ready to make these rumors come true if he allowed himself to say something extra. Raising his hands in an attempt to show submission, he hastened to assure her that he would never dare to deceive her. With obvious panic in his voice, he tried to prove that he found himself in a hopeless situation and had no other choice. Despite the explanation, Yu Waning's face remained tense and dissatisfied, as if what was said didn't matter. Unable to find the right words, the man tried in confusion to understand how to soften her anger and avoid the consequences. Having pulled himself together, he decided to speak frankly, promising to reveal everything without concealment or lies, hoping this would change her mood. Trying to sound convincing, Yu Xing's father began to explain the state of affairs in the company, mentioning the emergence of many competitors. In his defense, he added that under such conditions, the creation of doubles was necessary. Otherwise, he would have actually ended up in the hospital. From the cold glint in her eyes, it was clear that Yu Waning felt nothing but contempt for her nephew and did not accept his excuses for a moment. Without giving up, he continued to say that it was precisely because of pressure from competitors that he decided to go into hiding in order to find out who exactly wanted him dead. Looking down, he added more quietly that another reason was the desire to see his own daughter after a long separation. Trying to sound convincing, Yu Xing's father insisted that he did not wish her harm, but only wanted to take advantage of the company's growth to transfer some of the shares. With obvious irony in her voice, the mistress of the valley responded to these words, making it clear that she did not believe a single argument said. Mistaken for praise, the man sheepishly replied that he was not at all worthy of such words and was only trying to correct the past. Continuing to weave excuses, the cunning man insisted that he was tormented by a feeling of guilt because he had not fulfilled his fatherly duties. Citing the special bond between parent and daughter, he admitted that he had acted wrongly by not warning her in advance and hinted that he had feared the teacher's reaction. Not wanting to listen any longer, the girl pulled her hand away, and a dense cloud of blue energy began to swirl around her fingers. With a slight movement, she drew a line in the air and formed a sofa from the debris around her, as if reassembling the space. Without further ado, the woman sat down in the created place, showing that she was tired of listening to endless excuses. She folded her arms across her chest and stared at him as if he were something pathetic and insignificant. Meanwhile, the thought was already swirling in his head about who could have given away the hiding place and how the information reached her. Having dealt with the deception of the doubles, the mistress of the valley decided to move on to the question of the mother of the girl Yu Yu. Hearing this name, the sly man became noticeably nervous, began to stutter, and fear was clearly visible in his gaze. Trying to look casual, he feigned naivety and asked her why she thought he knew anything about Liu Yu. In a sweet drawl, he began to tell the story of how a woman had disappeared and left her child behind, and he had supposedly sent people out to search for her. Wanting to divert attention, he even tried to ask a counter question, hoping to change the subject. Showing no interest in her past relationships, she immediately turned the topic to Yu Xing and demanded to know what exactly was going on with her. He looked down sheepishly and began to talk about the complexities between demons, cats, and humans, mentioning that Liu Yu was frightened when she learned the truth, but she was already pregnant. To add weight to his words, he pressed his palm to his chest, claiming that the woman simply could not accept his essence. Trying to evoke sympathy, the man added bitterness to his voice and asked whether peaceful coexistence between humans and demons was even possible. Without hiding his tears, he recalled the difficulties his daughter had gone through, trying to evoke pity. With sudden force, the girl's father began to ask why Yu Waning had taken the girl away, claiming that his wife would have been able to raise her as her own. As the man spoke, a wave of red rage began to thicken around the woman, filling the space with oppressive tension. It was clear from her look that the girl was dear to her, and she did not feel the slightest regret about her decision. The growing force of anger swirled around her like a whirlwind, almost knocking the man off his feet with its weight. With difficulty keeping his position, Tianggang tried to say that he did not blame her, but simply did not understand what was happening. Not wanting to waste energy on explanations, the lady maintained a cold silence, considering him unworthy of detailed answers. Realizing that no explanation would follow, the man hastened to assure her that the Yu family was proud to have Yu Xing as their student. With icy confidence, Yu Wanning declared that she would take Yu Xing back to the valley in 2 days and demanded that he stop lying, no longer testing his patience. The point was that she knew Liu Yu's true origins, as she was not human, but belonged to the Tian Lang tribe of demons, which her nephew tried to hide. Despite the obviousness of the situation, Yu Tianggang continued to feign ignorance, insisting that he did not understand his guilt and was ready to accept any fate, even death. Having lost interest in his excuses, the woman dryly advised him to focus on earning money and not interfere where he did not belong for his own good. Looking at him with disdain, she thought only that everyone should leave with dignity, without stooping to pathetic excuses. Gradually, the female silhouette began to dissolve, as if erased from reality, starting from the top and slowly disappearing completely. Trying to take advantage of the last moment, he fell to his knees, begging her to come more often and thanking her for sparing his life. However, the words no longer reached their target, and she continued to disappear, not paying attention to what was happening around her. Left alone, he continued to kneel, his face buried in the floor, as if not daring to raise his eyes. Only after he was sure that she had completely disappeared did his expression change abruptly, and pity was replaced by anger. The man stood up, shook the dust off his clothes in disgust, and clicked his tongue in displeasure, as if shaking off the humiliation. He then raised his hand, and a stream of bright scarlet energy flared up around him, gradually filling the space. Under the influence of the force, everything around seemed to be engulfed in a single flame, where destruction began to merge into a common stream. Judging by what was happening, the spell was of a restorative nature, as the walls began to return to their previous state. When the process was complete, the scarlet streams dissipated and the room looked as if nothing had happened just recently. Walking over to his wine collection, he picked up a glass and continued speaking out loud, as if addressing the now vanished Yu Wanning. While the drink filled the glass itself, he reasoned that, contrary to her plans, Yu Xing would not leave the city until she found her mother. He was irritated by the ease with which she destroyed a house filled with valuable antiques, leaving nothing in its place. Unable to express it directly, he mentally humiliated her image, trying to at least somehow restore his inner balance. In his mind, she was interfering in other people's affairs every time she left the valley and intruded into his life. With grim determination, he promised himself that he would one day repay her for her intervention when his hidden plan was complete. Clenching his fists until they hurt, he tried to release the pent-up rage in some way. He sank into a chair with a glass, looking depressed and humiliated by the whole scene. Trying to forget himself, the man greedily drank wine like water, hoping to drown his heavy thoughts in it. Unable to contain his irritation, he abruptly smashed the glass in his hand, as if confirming his intention to act. In his own fantasies, the would-be father already imagined how he would subjugate Yu Wanning, even if it meant playing the role of a submissive relative. Meanwhile, Rong's car slowly stopped in front of the majestic mansion. Frowning in concentration, he assessed the situation, thinking about his next steps and carefully studying the facade of the building. Taking a few steps back, the secretary was clearly preparing for an action that required precise calculation. The next moment, his boot touched the protective aura that surrounded the house, testing the boundaries of the invisible barrier. Having assessed the structure of the defense, the long-haired secretary came to the conclusion that the barrier was too weak and without hesitation began to strengthen it, saturating the space with his own energy. The sudden pressure made the guards feel sick, but they still pulled themselves together and greeted him respectfully, calling him the Second Prince. At this time, on the balcony, a man in light clothing was calmly feeding the fish, throwing crumbs of bread into the water as if in deep meditation. Turning slowly, the gray-haired host met the guest with an even gaze and said that he was glad to see his brother return after a long absence. Not wanting to waste time on pleasantries, Rong immediately asked if their clan fragment was still safe. At first, the elder pretended not to understand what was being discussed and slowed down for a moment, as if thinking about his answer. Turning his gaze to the scarlet fish, he nevertheless confirmed that the fragment remained with them and was not lost. Hastily justifying his interest, Rong referred to rumors from the Yu family about the loss of their fragment and admitted that he had returned out of concern, Hearing this, the brother looked at him sharply and asked if a fragment of the cat clan had also disappeared and when exactly this had happened. Noticing the word also, Rongwei frowned and asked what exactly his brother meant with this strange expression. Without rushing to answer, the gray-haired man turned away to the water and quietly noted that the situation was far from favorable. With growing concern, Zhang listed recent disturbing events and asked not to hide important details from him. Frowning deeply, the elder admitted that he had not expected the influence of events 1,000 years ago on the current state of affairs. To explain what was happening, the elder began a story about ancient times, when the prince of their tribe married a princess from the cat clan and they had twins. Continuing the story, he noted that Vanan was the youngest of them and had the ability to create such frightening illusions that she began to be called the source of nightmares. Because of the danger of her gift, a cruel decision was made to isolate her from the others and turn her into a creature that everyone shuns. The conditions in her captivity were unbearable, and she was subjected to numerous suppressive spells, depriving her of strength and hope. Left alone, she spent her days in tears, hugging her knees and not understanding why her parents had turned away from her. Over time, despair turned into something else, and she completely merged with the source of horror that she had previously only used. After that, wherever she went, her presence brought suffering to those around her, even without active action. Faced with the threat, the tribes united, determined to stop it at any cost to stop the spread of pain. To do this, they called upon the legendary master, and the battle continued for 3 days and 3 nights, without letting up for a moment. In the end, she died of exhaustion, leaving behind only one good intention: a ban on the mixing of the blood of the two clans. Having finished his story, the king of the wolves calmly threw some more food into the water, as if he had just told an ordinary story. As a result of those events, Helavici was divided into 2 fragments, and each clan received one, after which Jun asked when they disappeared. The response was that it happened 25 years ago, and that their sister Lu Yu disappeared along with the fragment. At first, the elder believed that she had hidden it herself, but over time he realized that the truth was much more complex and hid it to avoid panic. With doubt in his voice, Zhong asked if his brother was sure that his sister's disappearance was connected to the fragments. In response, he admitted that he did not want to connect these events because she had not gone that far, and Yu Tiangang did not even know her true nature. Zhong's irritation grew because the fragment had disappeared, and the man was now connected to their family through offspring, which violated the established rules. He was also confused as to how Yu Xing could have appeared if her father was convinced that her mother was an ordinary person. Trying to calm down, the man convinced himself that the fragments themselves did not provide the opportunity to continue the family line. However, Zhong was sure that the disappearance of the artifacts was connected with the appearance of the girl, regardless of the circumstances of her birth. Thoughtfully placing his hand to his chin, the gray-haired man tried to piece together all the details into a single picture of what was happening. Suddenly, their thoughts coincided, and both almost simultaneously uttered an alarming conclusion, realizing that the girl was in danger. At this time, an unsuspecting Yu Xing slowly wandered through the corridors of the hotel, immersed in heavy thoughts. All her attention was focused on the teacher's decision and what awaited her father in the near future. Immediately after the conflict at her student's father's hideout ended, Yu Wanning moved back to the hotel without stopping for a moment. As soon as she saw her mentor, the girl hurried to her and began asking questions one after another, trying to find out what had happened and what had been discovered. Coming closer, the woman calmly told how many lies there were in Yu Tiangang's words, not hiding her irritation from the very communication with him. She also noted that, despite his intense agitation, he stubbornly continued to claim that he knew nothing about Yu Xing's mother, arousing even more suspicion. Hearing this, the girl guiltily lowered her gaze and apologized for her father's behavior. But the mentor immediately made it clear that the blame lay solely with him. Lightly tapping her on the head, she added that apologies were inappropriate now, and that the student should remember that she was not obligated to answer for other people's mistakes. As she headed to the sofa to rest a bit, the woman casually asked where the girl's older and third brothers were. Having received the answer that they had gone down for food, she calmly took out her pipe and lit it, as if trying to calm her irritation. Without holding back her emotions, she noticed that it was easier to wait for honest words from this man than to see a pig climb a tree. At that moment, the phone lying on the table suddenly began to ring persistently, attracting attention. Picking up the device, the girl said that Uncle Rongwei was calling her, and the teacher briefly ordered her to answer. On the other side, the man asked her to come to Tianlang Palace to discuss something important, but the girl's expression became anxious. She glanced at her mentor for confirmation and received silent agreement and support. Having made her decision, Yu Xing agreed to come, and heard that they were already waiting for her at the place. At that moment, the door swung open and guys noisily entered the room carrying heavy bags of food. The tired woman covered her forehead with her hand in displeasure and remarked that what she had brought was completely unsuitable, after which she ordered everyone to follow her. With obvious interest, the older brother asked how they would get there, hoping that there would be an opportunity to fly. However, the mentor did not intend to use the flight, and the entire company went to their destination by taxi. Arriving, she stopped in front and extended her hand toward the building, carefully studying the words placed on it. Soon her fingers seemed to sink into an invisible soft shell that had a faint purple tint. Having assessed what she saw, the mentor called such a defense primitive, while Jan asked in bewilderment what exactly was going on. Without hiding the truth, she explained that the barrier was broken by a space-blocking spell, making it impossible to teleport to the clan while Yu Xing was trying to get through. Attempts to contact were unsuccessful because the signal could not pass through the established limitation. Repeating the movement, Yan also felt something similar to a membrane, and the Sword King added that such measures were related to protection from external interference. At this time in the palace, the second prince looked at his watch with concern, realizing that a lot of time had passed since the connection. Realizing the lack of a signal, the elder brother concluded that the transmission was being blocked by an unknown barrier and suspected an information leak. Rong considered this unlikely, believing that the Yu family only saw him as a spy and would not act so decisively. Continuing his reasoning, he noted that the women of the Cat clan, according to his information, do not know about Yu Xing's mixed nature. He added that if the truth had been known, they would have immediately contacted the Tianlang rulers, rather than limiting themselves to setting up a barrier. Scratching his chin tensely, the older brother quietly said that something much more serious awaited them ahead. Time after time, pressing the phone to her ear, the red-haired girl heard the same soulless voice of the answering machine, informing that the subscriber was out of network coverage. Without hiding his irritation, Yuan declared that her attempts were useless and suggested that they resolve the issue by force, simply cutting through the barrier with a sword. Although the mentor acknowledged his skill, she still warned him about the risk of destroying not only the barrier, but everything around it. In response to his persistence, she calmly began to write something down in her notebook, and this unexpectedly caused the Sword King to look clearly uneasy. Trying to divert attention, the elder brother remarked that it was strange to see Rong Wei so open, since he had previously been aloof. Expanding on his thought, he expressed concern about inviting a girl from the Cat clan to the palace, wondering if it was acceptable. The girl shrugged her shoulders in embarrassment and admitted that she only knew that her uncle had said it was urgent and had not explained the reasons. Trying to figure it out, Yang and Yuan compared the secretary's behavior, but they couldn't put all the details together into a coherent picture. Pointing a little sharply at the girl, the older brother suggested that there might be a family connection between them. She rejected this with obvious disagreement, explaining that he merely worked for their family and that the address was a usual formality. Despite this, the older brother did not understand why she so confidently ruled out such a possibility. Yuan calmly intervened in the conversation and stated that Rong was indeed her uncle, leaving no room for doubt. Developing the thought, she explained that the girl had mixed blood of heavenly wolves and cat spirits, and that her mother belonged to the wolf family. Shocked by what she heard, the girl continued the sentence herself, naming the true name of Murong Zhongxia's mother, as if confirming her guess. Unable to understand the reason for her shock, Ian noted that there were no strict restrictions among demons as the girl tried to comprehend the truth. Leaning closer, the Sword King quietly explained that it was due to an ancient curse placed on these tribes. Crossing his arms, he emphasized that under such conditions, the appearance of offspring between them was considered impossible. The confused girl turned to her mentor, and at that moment, subtle streams of energy continued to flow from the woman's hand. Yuan glanced at her and said that the answer should be sought from her father, since he was the one who knew how this was possible. Suddenly, the silence was broken by a loud ringing telephone, causing everyone to stop talking. Seeing her father's name, the girl said it out loud, and the teacher immediately ordered her to turn on the speakerphone. He quickly and anxiously reported that he had found Yu Xing's mother and sent her address, after which he abruptly cut off the connection without giving an explanation. Clutching the phone with both hands, the girl could barely contain her emotion, and tears welled up in her eyes from the strain. When she opened the sent image, she saw her mother's face and froze in shock, unable to look away. Quietly turning to her mentor, the girl seemed to be seeking permission and heard a calm question about whether she wanted to go. She lowered her head and admitted that the time was wrong and her father might be lying, but she couldn't leave it unchecked. The woman responded with restraint and allowed her to go, but warned her that she would have to go alone, without an escort. Surprised by this decision, the girl did not understand why her mentor did not show anger and reacted so calmly. In response to this, Yu Wanning merely reminded her that she had already told her not to cause unnecessary worries and not to blame herself. Turning to her, she added that she herself would not be able to leave the barrier due to the hidden double structure of the spell cast. Continuing her explanation, the woman added that the second part of the spell had already been activated, and if she released control, the barrier would release its accumulated power. Lightly scratching the back of his head, the older brother admitted that at first he did not understand why the mentor kept her hand raised, to which she replied that it was the enemy's cunning plan. Taking her time lighting her pipe with her free hand, the head of the valley noted that such a strategy was vile and worthy only of someone worse than any insect. Continuing to hold the barrier, she explained that if she lowered her hand, the accumulated energy would turn into destruction and cover the entire city. At that moment, the system gave Yan an updated profile, which added to the assessment the indication that the woman was the embodiment of strength. Without taking her eyes off the situation, the teacher raised her voice and ordered all students to listen carefully to her instructions. With stern confidence, she announced that, as the head of the valley, she allowed them to use magic in the mortal world, provided that it did not harm people. Hearing this, the Sword King immediately understood the hint and was already looking forward to the opportunity to prove himself in a real fight. He enthusiastically thrust the sword into the paving slabs, declaring that its radiance could freeze vast areas. Coldly cutting off his impulse, the mentor noted that he would pay for the costs of the damage coating himself, which immediately cooled his ardor. Then her gaze fell on Wenhan, and it showed the intention of entrusting him with an important task. In a special tone, she reminded him that as the eldest, he was obliged to take care of the younger ones, and at that moment her eyes sparkled with extraordinary strength. Not daring to object, the young man immediately agreed, although his reaction revealed internal shock. Meanwhile, in the distance, a powerful waterfall crashed down from the cliff with a roar, raising clouds of wet steam. Using the address she had received as her guide, Yu Xing looked around and quietly said that they should be nearby by now. A modest house built in a traditional style appeared before them, completely matching the designated location. Supporting her, the Sword King gently suggested that she move forward, trying to give her confidence. As soon as they crossed the border of the territory, a strange wave passed through each of their bodies, as if they had been touched by a hidden barrier. The next moment, all three disappeared from sight, as if they had never stood in that place. Once on the other side, the girl looked around and did not see either Yuan or Yang nearby. She began calling out to them with alarm in her voice, but there was only dead silence all around. Trying to calm down, she decided that her mother might simply not want to see strangers, and that's why she set up such protection. Stopping in front of the door, the girl froze, not daring to enter because behind it lay the answer to an old question. Carefully touching the surface, Yu Xing tried to convince herself that she would see her mother very soon. The door gave way easily, and she walked inside with the feeling that in front of her was not a loved one, but something unknown. Inside sat a red-haired woman of striking beauty, looking indifferently toward the window. Hearing the sound, she turned her head, but her gaze remained cold and devoid of any warmth. Without emotion, she said her daughter's name, looking at her carefully as if assessing a stranger. Unable to contain her emotions, Yu Xing rushed towards her with tears of joy, saying that she had finally found her. The answer was a cold question, whether this was something to be happy about, and the girl stopped, as if amazed, not understanding the meaning of these words. Slowly rising from her chair, the woman in a modest black dress said coldly that if it were not for the birth of her child, she would not have had to spend many years in captivity, unworthy of her origin and status. Approaching Yu Xing, she stopped almost right next to him, and harshly added that it was because of her that her life had turned in this humiliating direction. Grabbing the girl by the chin, she continued to say that every time she looked at her, she only remembered the pain and torment she had gone through. Holding back her trembling, Yu Xing could no longer stop her tears when she heard that joy was unacceptable and alien to her. At the same time, among the dense trees, Yuan loudly called out to his older brother, trying to find him in the silence. Approaching the old well carefully, both leaned forward, and the younger quietly asked if Yan could hear what was coming from the depths. Muffled voices rose from the darkness, speaking of the appearance of living beings near them, and it sounded alarming. In a panic, he rushed towards John, clinging to him and confessing that he was afraid and could not cope with this fear. Without pushing him away, the elder brother thought with bewilderment how someone who was capable of crushing the world could so easily succumb to such horror. As she went deeper into herself, Yu Xing, unnoticed by the outside world, returned to her childhood memories when she was very little. From an early age, she felt that her appearance did not bring joy, and therefore she tried to be quieter and more inconspicuous so as not to cause unnecessary trouble. Gradually, the girl came to understand that for those around her, she was just a mistake and an unwanted reminder of someone else's guilt. An image of my mother came to mind, always looking at me with a slight shadow of displeasure that never left her face. Then came images of constant quarrels between her parents, and even then the girl felt that the cause of them lay in her. Recalling Ms. Tang's words, she heard accusations of family destruction and self-interest directed at her mother. Everywhere she went, she encountered condemnation and contempt, as if her very nature made people dislike her. She often imagined how her mother's fate would have turned out if she had not been there, and sincerely wished her happiness. With particular tenderness, the little girl looked at the photographs where the woman looked free and calm, without a shadow of suffering. Later in her life, a mentor appeared who took care of her and took her away from that place to the valley. Then she agreed to leave, hoping that by doing so she would relieve her mother of the burden and do the right thing. Leaving the house, the girl believed that her disappearance would bring her mother relief and long-awaited peace. Now tears flowed from the realization that all her hopes for love had been in vain. Unable to bear the tension, Yuxing screamed, asking why she was not loved and what she had done to deserve it. The response was a cold look and words about how it was not just a lack of love, but hatred. Hearing this, the girl froze, unable to accept what she had heard, and pain instantly engulfed her consciousness. Unable to resist, she sank to her knees, continuing to search for an answer and hoping to hear at least a drop of warmth. Yuxing clutched her head and tried to understand why she looked disgusting, even in her mother's eyes. Thoughts were confused and tore her apart from the inside, filling everything around with a feeling of hopelessness and heaviness. It was as if the last threads holding her together were breaking inside, and she began to blame herself for her own existence. Unable to withstand the pressure, she collapsed to the floor, and reality around her began to disintegrate, as if losing stability. Even the image of the mother before my eyes began to distort, as if losing clarity and dissolving into the trembling space. In a breaking voice, the girl barely managed to whisper a request for her mother to stop looking at her so coldly, after which her strength finally left her and consciousness faded. As if responding to an internal breakdown, the space around the house began to visibly tremble, transmitting vibrations even to the roof and walls. In the distance among the trees, the air also moved in waves and swayed, but Yuan was sure that this was due to spirits emerging from the well. With a trembling voice and tears in his eyes, he shouted that the creature must be huge to be able to cause such shaking around. With difficulty containing his irritation, Ian looked at him, not understanding how a man with such strength could be at a loss in front of such things. Sharply grabbing him by the shoulders, he said loudly that the source of what was happening was not the well at all, but that, probably, trouble had happened to their younger sister. Without loosening his grip, he continued to explain that the separation itself was far more dangerous than some ghostly shadows nearby. With growing alarm, he said that such a trap could turn into a disaster and that everything was connected with the girl's origin. Trying to shake him, Ian added that he shouldn't give up, because it was he who had to get their sister out of this situation. Stumbling over every word, the Sword King began to repeat what he had heard, agreeing that they needed to act and save her. Meanwhile, a figure of a woman with neatly tied hair slowly appeared from the dark well. Seeing her, he screamed in horror again, while Ian only winced, considering such a reaction excessive. Gradually rising outside, a woman in ancient clothing extended her hands and offered to try a certain medicine. She approached slowly, repeating her words monotonously, while the older brother remained motionless, watching intently. Trying to hide behind his comrade's back, he desperately refused to accept anything and looked genuinely scared. Irritation flared up inside the older brother, and he was about to intervene, intending to use force against the strange vision.